Please be seated. The Secretary will read the first to the third orders together.
Consideration of report of Standing Committee on Finance on rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill. Consideration of report of Standing Committee on Finance on taxation laws amendment bill. Consideration of report of Standing Committee on Finance on tax administration laws amendment bill.
I now recognize the Honorable Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Chairperson, I move for the adoption of the report.
The motion is that the reports be adopted. Are there any objections?
Chair, please note the objection of the DA.
To be noted. Are there any further objections?
Yes, Chairperson, please note the objection of the FF Plus.
Thank you. Are there any further objections? If there are no further objections, the reports are agreed to. The Secretary will read. Honorable members there at the back, on my left-hand side, can you just tone down a bit, please? The Secretary will read the 4th to 6th orders together.
First reading debate, rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill. First reading debate, taxation laws amendment bill. Second reading debate, tax administration laws amendment bill.
It will be very helpful if the table can furnish me with a speakers list. There's no speakers list in front of me. I now recognize the Honorable Mashwangani, who will introduce the debate. The Honorable Mashwangani.
Dr. George, Sullivan. Thanks, Honorable Chairperson, honorable members. As the Honorable Chairperson has alluded to, I'm here to present the report on the 3 bills, the rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws or bill, the tax administration laws amendment bill, and the taxation laws amendment bill. The bills were presented or tabled by the minister as he was tabling the budget and the MTBBS. Honorable Chairperson, just a background that we are presenting these bills when we have got weaknesses in the economy locally and globally, with high levels of unemployment, poverty, and inequality. In short, it's called the UPI. A path towards the fiscal sustainability should take into account these underlying dynamics of the economy. Government should ensure that resources for measures to transform the structure of the economy and to alleviate the suffering associated with unemployment, poverty, and inequality. Chairperson, the economic structure in South Africa remains highly concentrated and inadequately diversified. It is important to say this, Chairperson, so that we don't just present these bills like it's a compliance matter or administrative, but we are dealing with tax, which should not only save a particular income group, but should serve also those who have been previously disadvantaged. Also, Chairperson, it should be noted that many households are experiencing a cost of living crisis as a result of high inflation. The inflation is quite very high, Chairperson. And what is also unfortunate is that because the Reserve Bank has got the responsibility to defend the rand, as a result of high inflation, they respond by hiking the repo rate, and resultantly, the banks also increase the interest rates. As we speak, so many people find it very, very difficult to service their house bonds, their car loans, and other loans, more especially from the SMEs. It's a matter that we have raised with the minister, that many people, including the middle income, at the stage in which we find ourselves, and I think it includes even members of this house, find it very difficult because you don't have housing subsidies to service the loans from the bank as a result of the ever high inflation and high interest rates. For those who are employed, real wages are declining, and so are households' disposable incomes. I think you have realized that it is very difficult these days to see people pushing trolleys when they go to supermarkets as a result of the disposable income, which is ever eroded by high inflation and ever increasing interest rates. And on this one, on the issue of food security, Dr. George and Surupen, who are members of our committee, and De Villiers, we agree on this one. There are other issues where we differ, but on the issue of food security, it's a problem, and all of us have to attend to this matter. Because it is like, come February, I'm not a sangom or a prophet, but it looks like there's going to be another hike of interest rate. And where does it leave the working class and the middle class too? And people are left with no income to buy food, to send children to school. So we're only left with money to service our bonds and our car loans. And if you look more especially at independent schools, there are so many parents who are defaulting. It's just that at the public schools, children have got the right to attend, you can't do anything. But at independent schools, they are finding it very difficult to sustain themselves as a result of parents who can afford school fees. And where is this leading us to? It's a debate that we have to take up. I'm giving this background so that, as I've said, that it should not just be like it's an administrative method to present tax issues. High inflation and tax rates are further eroding the household disposable incomes. Low and middle income households, SMEs, are seriously impacted by macroeconomic development. The tax system should be used to redistribute wealth and income to the majority who live in poverty. Chairperson, what we are saying is that as government has got a responsibility to raise revenue, and as this parliament, we take a decision through appropriations like tomorrow or next week, where we decide where money goes. Money is distributed or gets shared to municipalities, for instance, through equitable shares. I mean, equitable share formula. But you have got areas, municipalities like Tshwane, where we take a decision here to distribute equitable share, but neglect the townships. You find the townships, sewage is spilling, there are potholes all over. But if you go to the east of Pretoria, it's like you are in Europe. You go to the west of Pretoria, you are in the third world. Yes, and the same applies, Comrade Faiz, here in Cape Town. So tax is better governance when you only allocate it to the affluent areas and neglect the township, it can't be Dr. George. It can't be you as a public representative who said that. So we can't be passing bills where this tax that we're deciding here today, money is not distributed equitably. It can't be. And those who were previously disadvantaged in the apartheid continue to be disadvantaged. Where they stay in Mkuku, and as I've said, unemployment is very high. Hunger is a reality. There are people who go to bed without having put anything in their stomachs. So this tax that we're talking about here should be distributed equitably to deal with unemployment, more especially youth unemployment. Youth unemployment is quite very high. I think it's 74% or so. To deal with poverty, which is a reality. To deal with inequality. South Africa, I think, is the most unequal country in the world, if it's not amongst. So when we pass these legislations, it should be able to address these triple challenges. And youth, women, and people with disability are the people who are highly affected by the inequitable distribution of revenue. We commend the SARS, Honorable Chair, in the manner that it is administering the tax. They've improved a lot. However, an area where every year we continue to raise, which is the issue of the digital tax. Failure to reach the global consensus on a digital tax is compromising revenue collection. A lot of business today is done in the digital platform. And there has been debate in the OECD and other platforms, but no decision, concrete decision yet has been taken. So Honorable Minister, Finance, raise this matter in the international platforms, because that's where money is flowing today. Things are no longer the same like they used to be ever before. So this is a matter that should be attended to. We commend the SARS in the manner that they are administering tax, as I've indicated. When they were celebrating the 25th anniversary, they took us through the Op Center. They have done a lot to improve the digital project at SARS in Brooklyn, in Tshwane. We commend SARS for them. And moving towards conclusion, Chairperson, as a committee, we received inputs in the form of public participation through the stakeholders on the 3 bills, on the Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill, on the Tax Laws Amendment Bill, as well as on the rates and monetary amounts and the Amendment of Revenue Laws Amendment Bill. There were issues that were raised by the public that Treasury and SARS have to address, more especially the issue of the fuel levy. As we have said before, we call upon the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Energy to deal with this matter of fuel price. Fuel is very expensive today. Even us as members here, at least we get subsidized by coming by bus. I'm not sure if we're using our cars, we're going to afford to come here. What about ordinary workers who work at shops and all over here, low skilled? Even public transport is very expensive as we speak as a result of the fuel price. And it also spikes even the increase of food inflation. So this is a matter that has to be attended to. We acknowledge that there are challenges in Ukraine, in all over Saudi Arabia, those who have got oil producing countries. But the 2 ministers, the sooner they meet and direct where these matter is being, how this matter is being addressed, the better. And we also call upon Treasury to fast track the review of the excise policy. Those who are in the tobacco and the liquor industry have raised quite a number of issues, and the Treasury and SARS have agreed that they are going to expedite the review of the the excise policy. So the sooner they deal with this matter, the better, including the vapor, the new way of smoking, because so there's another way of smoking vapor. I think young people can explain to you better. They argue that there's no nicotine and all sorts of stuff. So the excise policy will deal with that. Honorable Chairperson, I move for the adoption of the report on the 3 bills.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker is the Honorable George.
Thank you, Chairperson. Tax is theft if government mismanages the people's money. The tax laws reflect government's fiscal policy and fund its budget. To ensure tax compliance, we need an environment where taxpayers perceive at least some value for money. Tax administration laws are meant to find the fine balance between the right of taxpayers to fair treatment and SARS' obligation to collect revenue. SARS was seriously compromised when it was captured, and although action was taken against management consultants who in effect stole billions from South African taxpayers, the ANC government was never held to account. We will never know how much was siphoned out of SARS, and will take a very long time before the public trust is restored in our tax authority. Although not of their making, SARS is the mechanism for government to fund the consequences of the mismanagement of our economy. Under these circumstances, taxpayer rights must enjoy priority. It is their money that enables government to function at all. We do not support the amendments to the tax administration bill. They do not do enough to support taxpayers to obtain advance rulings and directives. Hard-working South Africans are already paying amongst the highest tax rates in the world and receive far too little in return. Our education system produces learners who are not equipped to earn a living. Our public health service doesn't deliver a healthy population. Our police service is unable to keep us safe. Hard-working taxpayers fund the very comfortable lifestyles of the millionaire managers who bloat the public service and pay the interest on the mountain of debt that government has accumulated for consumption expenditure and not for infrastructure spending and growing our economy. Last year, 51 billion rand of public money was lost to irregular spending. Before the pandemic began, our economy was already on its knees because government made the wrong choices. Instead of offering tax incentives to attract investment capital and encourage entrepreneurs and small business to take the risks necessary to get new ventures off the ground, government-backed state-owned enterprises with hundreds of billions of rands without anything to show for it, except a few fabulously rich political crony tenderpreneurs. Instead of offering incentives to generate more energy and install solar panels, government wants to pile at least 200 billion rand of Eskom debt onto the already massive mountain of national debt that will exceed 5 trillion rand next year. That debt needs to be serviced by hardworking taxpayers who can't even boil a kettle for a cup of coffee when in return for their investment, they get rolling blackouts. If government was a business, it would be in business rescue. And if it was a household, it would be heading for debt review. In his midterm budget, the minister mentioned trade-offs, the choices that need to be made with the people's money. He never mentioned the cost of living crisis, not even once, and made no attempt to alleviate pressure on the 81% of households that cannot put enough food on their tables. Tax laws can lower the fuel price by reducing the fuel levy and can expand the zero-rated food basket. If government did not make the trade-offs that it has chosen, such as the 30 billion rand bailouts to Denel, Transnet and Sunrail, and better manage the public sector wage bill, it would have more than enough fiscal space to zero-rate bone-in chicken, tinned beans, beef, wheat flour, margarine, peanut butter, tea, coffee, baby food, and soup powder. If government made the necessary labor reforms, scrapped economy-draining BEE, and injected private sector efficiency into the state-owned enterprises, our economy would grow and tax revenue with it. We can build an enterprising economy if government lets go of its unworkable dream of placing a corrupt and hopelessly incapable state at the center of our economy. Instead of guarantees to pay the debts of bankrupt state-owned enterprises, government could instead guarantee the social grants that it will soon be unable to pay as debt servicing costs crowd out more and more service delivery. The minister cannot assure vulnerable South Africans that the social relief of distress grants will continue, let alone introduce a basic income grant that a DA government would fund off economic growth. We will soon introduce a responsible spending bill to contain national debt and debt servicing costs. The DA will not agree to tax increases and do not support increased levies and tariffs under circumstances where government is incapable of spending it to the benefit of the people. We do not support the bills. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honourable Member. The EFF. The next speaker is the Honourable Nkosi Buthelezi.
Hello, Chairperson.
Yes, Honourable Member.
Yeah, let me check the Deputy President, Chair. We will come back after Honorable Nkosi Buthelezi.
Thank you. The Honourable Buthelezi.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chairperson. In a country like ours, where the majority are poor and the slow rate of growth the economy is experiencing, we are forced to stretch ourselves thin and do a lot with the little we've got. We know the good work that SARS is doing in collecting taxes, even though there's much more room for improvement in their administrative capacity, efficiency, and compliance. What's most important in our country right now is a government that understands the plight of our people and more so understanding their needs. It doesn't matter how much money is collected by our government if people are not seeing it being used to benefit and contribute to their quality of life through the delivery of proper and adequate services due to them. Honourable Chair, we have come to a point where lack of capacity, political will, and inattitude by government has resulted in our people avoiding the duty to pay their taxes. Even when they do so through a long haul which we can understand, not excused, because there is a long string of precedents set by this government to prove that their money will be mismanaged. Issues of maladministration, wasteful expenditure, and corruption have laid bare just how wasteful the government is and how it refuses to contribute to the lives of our people. It is high time that the attention is given to quality assurance of all services delivered and targets, as opposed to more collection and distribution of the resources being our main focus. Quality assurance should be a vital component of service delivery and one that government puts at the core of its operations. Our people will only start then to willingly comply with tax payment as they will be seeing the fruits of paying their taxes. The public perception is that tax is paid to fund lifestyle of government officials and be embezzled by politicians, and the government's attitude towards service delivery enables this understanding at a large extent. The imposing of tax, Honourable Chair, should be done fairly, not in a manner that will discourage business and investment. For example, the proposal to impose a flat rate on vaping or electronic non-nicotine delivery system products, regardless of nicotine content, is unsubstantive. A product with high nicotine content should not be treated the same as that with lower nicotine content. This not only limits the growth of vaping industry and investment that comes with it, but also put a strain on the country's healthcare system, which is barely coping with cigarette, as been proven to be true that smoking is more harmful than vaping. As taxpayers, we are religiously paying our dues. The government should also do their part to fulfill the needs of our people. Taxes are the lifeblood of government, and nobody should be exempted from paying where it's reasonably due. We wish to see, Honourable Chairperson, one day, lines of people voluntarily queuing to disclose and pay taxes, not because they are demanded to do so or someone to do so, but because they see the value for their money and trust that the money that they are paying will trickle down to services offered to them. The IFP supports the report, Honourable Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Member.
Thank
the
you,
speaker-
Chair.
Speaker from the EFF,
Yes, Chair, the Deputy President has got a problem of network. I'll take it, Chair.
please continue.
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chairperson, the processing of revenue laws and tax bills is one of the most important functions of Parliament that is neglected and has been reduced to a rubber stamp exercise on an annual basis. While bills such as the Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill deal with administrative issues of the South African Revenue Services and technical matters such as pensions and retirement fund interest, definition of what is an invoice, and other issues like that. The rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws and the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill deal with tools that we can use as redistributive tools in fiscal policy and are important, and we will deal with just a few fundamental and structural issues. Firstly, despite our insistent and repeated submission, SARS has failed to present a convincing and believable plan to collect maximum revenue from new booming online trading platforms. The rate at which SARS is moving means we will not have a comprehensive approach to revenue collection from the likes of Takealot, Google, Amazon, and many other upstarts that continue to aggressively avoid tax and have post boxes as headquarters in tax havens. We will still don't have a clear plan to overhaul legislation to deal in a much more comprehensive way with illicit financial flows, base erosion, and profit shifting. And one of the reasons why there is some reluctance in the ANC is because their president keeps US dollars bills inside his furniture. Only a criminal like some drug smugglers will keep stolen foreign currency in his mattress. We need to admit that all sectors, not just the mining sector, are involved in some form of illicit financial flows, base erosion, and profit shifting. And this has a serious consequences for our ability to correct revenue that is rightfully ours, to fund free, quality, decolonized education, pay social grants, fix our healthcare system, and eradicate the infrastructure backlog that is sitting in billions of rands while we lose trillions of rands in revenue. We cannot give this important work to the National Treasurer and SARS, as they have no sufficient demonstrated that they are not interested, including failing to build a robust capacity. The FF will hold a webinar early in 2023 to engage with all stakeholders and revive and finalize an anti-tax avoidance bill that must be introduced and be finalized before the end of the 6th Parliament. House Chairperson, alcohol consumption is extremely high in South Africa, and clearly tax measures to discourage consumption are not working yet. The damage alcohol is causing to our communities, to our youth, and infrastructure runs in billions of rands. We agree with the committee that we must put non-tax measures in place, and one of them is an alcohol ban. We cannot have alcohol advertised everywhere, even targeting children. It must be difficult to come across alcohol. The tax relief that was provided to motorists from March until May 2022 was not enough. As things stand now, the majority of workers are going to work simply to buy petrol. Many will soon stop buying food to buy petrol because they cannot afford to stay at home. We must find a much more sustainable approach to the fuel levy. In its current form, it is misguided like the division of revenue formula, which incorrectly assumes that municipality can collect enough revenue to cover more 70% of their operational cost when our people do not have money and are unemployed. We still have VAT that was increased to 15% with some commitment to review it, and workers are still waiting. We still have company income tax that is supposedly untouchable because those in charge of tax policy are puppets of big white-owned corporations. Lastly, Chairperson, we were shocked that SARS is refusing to tell the public how much it gave to the alleged Rock Unity members because some of reparation process chaired by Advocate Thuli Madonsela. We wrote to the Commissioner of SARS and he refused point blank to be transparent. What does that tell you? Why you give people money if you are not going to the public to tell how much you are giving them, especially those with serious allegation who never answered in front of judge, but a charge dropped due to some corrupt NPA backroom deal. The EFF rejects revenue laws and tax bills, Chair. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. The next speaker is the Honorable Wessels.
Thank you, House Chairperson. House Chair, it is important to capacitate the revenue collector and especially to improve the administrative capacity and the efficiency of SARS. But Chairperson, it is important that government should earn taxes and not only collect taxes. Currently, this government is collecting tax revenue and then misappropriating funds, allowing corruption, allowing money to be looted. That is the wrong way to do it. That does not earn the trust of taxpayers. It does not instill confidence in what is currently happening. The Honorable Mashwangani blames the distribution and ill distribution, according to him, of tax money for the decay and poor service delivery in certain areas. But that cannot be. It is because of the looting and corruption of money that infrastructure is decaying and that we have the budget deficit we currently do. We have the collapse in infrastructure due to the fact that money, and let's take one example of the Honorable Mashungwani's comrade, the Ace Magashule, that spent and allowed 225 million rand to be spent on the counting of asbestos roofs in the Free State. That money was stolen. How many houses could have been built for that 225 million rand? And that's one example. Government collects tax revenue, but then does not spend it on the right priorities. Government is allowing public hospitals to be mortuaries rather than to serve the ill and to provide healthcare as dictated to by the Constitution of South Africa. That is what is to be blamed, not the tax system and not the distribution of tax money, but the fact that there is wrong priorities. Money is not being spent on actually addressing the priorities. The Honorable Mashungwani says money must be spent to address youth unemployment, but tax money must be spent to create a conducive environment for the private sector to create jobs. Then youth unemployment will be addressed. Currently, money is being wasted. Government does not earn taxes, but are wasting tax money, and we cannot support these bills. I thank you.
The next speaker is the Honorable Swart.
Thank you, House Chair. House Chair, the ACDP would firstly like to commend SARS on revenue collection, which has exceeded projections, resulting in gross tax revenue estimate being revised upwards by 83.5 billion to 1.68 trillion rand. Well done to a repurposed SARS under the leadership of Commissioner Kisveta and his team. We appreciate, however, that this tax windfall is dependent on a number of variables, particularly that economic growth is sustained at the projected level. And we also appreciate that these taxes must be properly spent by government. It is a requirement for government to be good stewardship of state funds. This is required, and it is sorely lacking at the moment, given the high levels of fraud and corruption that we have seen. It is noteworthy, however, when it comes to the tax, that even before this additional tax windfall, February's 2022 budget contained no measures to raise additional tax revenue. This the ACDP welcomes as the ACDP, as it supports hard-pressed households and businesses. Further tax relief was also provided in not adjusting the general fuel levy and the RAF levies, and whilst fully adjusting for personal income tax brackets and rebates for inflation. Now, the ACDP supports these measures, but believes far more can be done to alleviate the fuel levy pressure. And in this regard, we keenly await the outcome of the review that has been promised, as we believe that this will go a long way to lift the pressure on households. The ACDP also shares the view expressed in the report about the illicit trade in alcohol and tobacco, and that this is a serious problem in society, and believes that far more needs to be done. We agree with the National Treasury's approach that problems related to alcohol consumption and abuse require a comprehensive package of tax and non-tax measures to address this effectively. And this also, of course, includes social interventions when one has abuses in this regard. The ACDP also supports the fact that far more needs to be done to stop illicit financial flows, base erosion, and profit shifting, which is costing the country billions in lost revenue. Lastly, the Taxation Laws Amendment Bill and Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill deal with technical amendments, which we do not believe go far enough to address the issues raised by taxpayers in this regard. And whilst it is aimed to enhance tax compliance, clearly, thank you. House Chair.
Please continue, Honorable Swart. I see the Honorable Masondo and his microphone switched on. But please continue.
The Taxation Laws Amendment Bill and the Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill deal with technical amendments, and a number of submissions were received where concerns were raised about a number of the issues raised in these bills. And whilst SARS and National Treasury tried to approach these from a tax compliance method, obviously one also has to bear in mind that it is taxpayers' money that is involved here, and these issues are a matter of concern for the ACDP. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The UDM, the ATM, the NFP.
Thank you, House Chairperson. I just want to apologize. I'm on the road, so I'll have my video off if it's okay with you, Chairperson.
Please proceed, Honorable Member.
Yeah, thank you, House Chairperson. Yeah, the National Freedom Party wants to reiterate that we need to do more with less. Now, we expected we did not anticipate additional revenue, but because of the high commodity prices, and more importantly, because of the export of coal. And if you saw what happened at the Richards Bay terminal, from 450 tons, we were exported 4.5 million tons. And that is now taking advantage of the war between Russia and Ukraine. Now, we would have expected there to be more tax relief rather than wanting to increase the tax, particularly on the 13% of people in South Africa who pay taxes. How much more can we get from that 13%? The other issue is, Chairperson, I've heard one of my colleagues talking about equitable share, particularly to local government. Shouldn't the question be when and how will we improve the capacity at local government level before we provide them with further revenue? Now, let me just say this again. I've just come back from Newcastle and Ladysmith, Chairperson. If you look at the CBDs alone, they are in shocking conditions. It clearly indicates that we do not have the necessary capacity at these local government elections. On the issue of vaping particularly, in the absence of any evidence that it is less harmful, I think that we would agree that yes, indeed, we should increase taxes. The other problem we have is on the sugar taxes, which we've supported a few years ago, but very little or nothing has been done with that money to ensure we reduce the level of diabetes in the country. In fact, there's an increase in terms of diabetes. And when we talk about the fuel levy, we're saying we should scrap it and take this road accident fund and privatize it so that it is in the hands of insurance companies and motorists then can pay through their licensing. So the National Freedom Party is making these suggestions so that we would have less on an impact in increasing taxes, particularly for those small percentage that are carrying this entire country. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The AIC.
Not participating in the debate, Chair.
Thank you. Cope. Al Jama. The Honorable Serupin.
Why is keeping PAC, Chair?
Excuse me, I didn't hear you, honorable member. From the PAC,
I'm saying you skipped the PAC.
you didn't give
And
any
we are not
indication, you
speaking,
did
but-
not give an indication that you're participating in the debate. So you're not on the speakers list. However, if you want to make a comment, you may do so, honorable member.
No, pass, Chair. The
Yes,
official
please, honorable
of
member.
PAC name is-
Don't waste our time. The DA, honorable Serupen, please continue.
Thank you very much, House Chair Frolick. Let me start my remarks today by saying finally, someone in the governing party has heard what the DA is saying, and I'd like to welcome the comments from the Honorable Chair of the Finance Committee around the cost of living crisis, and we hope that he'll work with us to expand the list of zero-rated items for food so that we can slash a lot of food bills by 15% going forward. But onto my main remarks. Let me state this. Taxation is a part of a social contract, and people who pay taxes, and all South Africans pay taxes because of that, expect a high level of trust between the state and the citizens, and in return for their taxes, expect things in this country to work. But the government has made a habit of breaking trust with taxpayers. And if you'll allow me to prosecute the case, I've got 5 exhibits of evidence. Exhibit A is state capture, in which 250 billion rand of taxpayer money was stolen, state-owned companies were looted, and the tax authority was systematically decimated. Exhibit B is that in the last year alone, 51 billion rand in irregular expenditure was incurred. Exhibit C is that there is a breach of trust in the state of our public services. Go and visit a police station or a public hospital and see the decaying infrastructure, the under-resourced staff, or the fact that we've got all these government-appointed millionaire managers, which is Exhibit D. There are 30,000 millionaire managers. And this government seems very good at appointing millionaire managers rather than police or nurses or doctors. And these managers do have one job. They're post boxes. They receive information and then click the forward button in their email inbox to send it to someone else. R1 million a year for a lot of these, 30,000 of them. And then we've got Exhibit E, the greatest case we can prosecute against the government. And that is the way the ANC has run local government into the ground. And I invite you to visit the Tsabotla municipality in the northwest. You've got potholes the size of craters there. And the reason is because there were 2 warring factions of the ANC who each appointed their own mayor and municipal manager, and services were ground down to nothing. Instead of dealing with their members, what did they do? They just dissolved the municipality. Let's have a fresh election, rather than prosecuting their own members. So all of these exhibits demonstrate a case that we can prosecute here, that the state is not living up to its half of the social contract. And a failure by the state is now becoming a long-term trend with no sign of reversal. And as such, we cannot support these bills until the state rebuilds its social contract with the taxpayers. I thank you.
Thank you, honorable member. The next speaker is the Honorable Kaisa.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chair. Each year we are called upon as the Finance Committee to assess the proposals from the National Treasury, revenue proposals designed to generate revenue on finance, the policy demands of the medium-term strategic framework, and the related policy demands of the governing party's manifesto. In addition, these 3 bills have to respond to the demands of providing revenue to finance the operations of the state and respond to our international binding commitments. Therefore, these bills reflect the policy choices that inform the level and the extent of adjustment to generate such revenue. Given that these matters directly impact upon these millions plus employed who earn above the minimum threshold, the ANC takes seriously what has come out of the public participation process. We are a representative democracy based on a system of proportionality, and therefore the interests and demands of the people are very important. These bills are not about technicalities as some things. They have a real impact on the economy and revenue that the state can use to finance policy programs and statutory obligations. With regards to the bills, with the raised bills, it is directly addresses concerns that the people have raised around the cost of living, especially transport. The adjustments reflects the changes made in 2022 regarding temporary relief on the fuel levy, as well as the postponement of the effective date of an increase in fuel levy, in health promotion levy to 2023. Again, this postponement arises out of public engagement, provides space to address concerns. This is a progressive move designed to bring relief to millions and to assist business and by extension, employment creation. With regards to threshold of personal income tax, yes, the rich must subsidize the poor. The ANC government has for a long time been progressively lifting the threshold, providing relief and support to low-income earners. The raised bill changes rates and monetary threshold to the personal income tax and ensures that wealthy cross-subsidize the needs of the state and by extension, the needs of the society. Some disappointedly, most of the key issues from the public hearings on the rates and monetary bills were on the general increase in the excise duty on alcohol and tobacco. Again, the benefits that the ANC government has brought through the raise bill is that there are no measures to raise additional tax revenue, which has been done in order to support households and business. If one takes this together with other tax relief measures to support households by not adjusting the general fuel levy and the road accident fund levies, and the adjusting of personal income tax brackets and rebates for inflation, we will argue with evidence that the rates and monetary bill is progressive and reflects orientation of the ANC government. On the Tax Administration Laws Amendment Bill, which is really about the administration of taxation, and it's not a money bill, it deals with what came in February budget insofar as it impacts upon the administration of the 7 and other pieces of legislation. Some of the key issues that arose from the public participation was the imposition of an understatement penalty for employment tax incentives being improperly claimed, a corrupt practice which the amendment bill seeks to resolve. Again, evidence of an ANC government through law dealing with corrupt practices that arises from the private sector. Corruption that arises from the private sector. Another corrupt practice that the admin laws amendment bills deals with is that of tax compliance abuse and a submission of the so-called nil returns in order to appear compliant. This is a risk management matter for SARS, where a taxpayer applies for a tax compliance status and nil returns have been submitted. All these amendments are aimed at improving SARS administrative capacity efficiently and enforcing compliance. On the matter of taxation laws, amendment bill, this deals directly with national taxes, levies, duties, and surcharges. In summary, for anyone who is employed and has savings, the proposals specifically deal with reviewing accrual of variable remuneration interest exemption and capital gains tax, annual exclusion, interest in retirement fund, vested rights when transferring to a public sector fund, retirement of provident fund members and tax neutral transfers from pension to a provident fund. Public participation was vibrant and multiple issues were engaged. Key ones being customs and excise, electronic nicotine and non-nicotine products on the carbon tax. Carbon tax raised proposal from 2023 to 2030, electricity price neutrality extension, energy efficiency savings tax, incentive, and on-income tax. Individual savings and employment. Over 100 submissions were made during the consultative process. National Treasury and SARS held workshops over 2 days on 8 and 9 September to workshop the draft bills with stakeholders. This is a very progressive development, something other departments should do, especially on complex legislation like these 3 bills. On the vaping tax proposals in the bill, we understand that there would always be disagreement on the rate structure of a new proposed taxes on electronic nicotine. On the proposed increases in carbon tax, we agree that there is a need for a deep, urgent emissions reductions and the implementation of the carbon tax that is meaningful, avoids double incentives, and underpins increases proposed are well below what experts recommend as necessary to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement, and here business was being accommodated. With regards to the opposition parties, very little strategic value was added to the debate other than vested interest and not broader society concern. So it is not your business to, instead of attending and discussing about this bill and you bring an issue of ANC factions. You have to deal with your own DA problems of expelling blacks in your own party and leave the ANC
Honorable member, your time is
Let's
now
support this
expired.
bill. Thank you very much.
Order, honorable members. The next speaker is the Honorable Deputy Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. Firstly, I would like to extend my appreciation to the Standing Committee on Finance for their consideration and oversight of the 2022 tax proposals that were announced in February. These bills seek to contribute towards economic growth, boost employment, and reduce the cost of living. These bills include an expansion in the employment tax incentive to incentivize firms to employ more of our youth, and freeze in the general fuel levy in order to cushion the impact of high prices on households. This year, the government provided a further 10.5 billion in tax relief to counter the cost of living crisis through temporary reductions in the fuel levy. Other measures sought to raise revenue through increasing excise duties on alcohol and tobacco. We also included provisions to begin to tax electronic cigarettes. The bills also include a higher carbon tax rate over the years as we try to proactively combat climate change by doing our part as a country to reduce carbon emissions. We've already seen the detrimental impacts of climate change on our communities through damages from floods, and we must do our part to reduce the impact. These proposals have led to strong and vigorous debates, both within the public workshops that were held by National Treasury and in the hearings and sessions by the Standing Committee on Finance and in today's parliamentary session. We welcome these debates as they help us to consider all the consequences of tax policy changes in our endeavor to create a tax system that is fair and that raises sufficient revenue for our expenditure needs. Let me briefly reflect, Chairperson, on some of these debates that we have heard in those platforms that I've just mentioned. In terms of the excise duties proposals, the health fraternity has implored upon us to make even more higher increases on alcohol and tobacco. The industry has called upon us to continue to combat the illicit trade of tobacco. I want to emphasize that SARS is doing a lot to remove illegal cigarettes from our streets. Furthermore, excise duties are an important tool to reduce the consumption of these products and improve health outcomes of our people. Yes, we're not paternalistic as government to prescribe on how people should live their lives. We believe in bodily autonomy of adults. It's our responsibility, however, to provide health services to sickly bodies. Smoking, tobacco, and excessive consumption of alcohol is not good for human bodies. A healthy population is both happier and more productive with lower costs of healthcare and higher levels of economic growth. The 2022 budget announced an inflationary increase on health promotion levy, which is also known as sugar tax. However, after consultations with his colleagues, the minister announced a postponement of the increase to next year, 1st April. This postponement has been welcomed by the industry and labor as a means to assist employment and grow the sector. Government's intention to tax electronic cigarettes was announced in previous budgets due to the growing evidence that these products are harmful. The introduction of the new tax will go ahead, but the effective date has been delayed from 1 January 2023 to 1st January 2023. We've also announced the tax rate trajectory to give policy certainty over the short, medium, and long term to create a more certain policy environment that will encourage investment towards green economy.
Honorable
The move
Deputy
toward the
Minister,
lower carbon.
Honorable Deputy Minister, will you just pause for a moment? Honorable Member, why are you rising?
Honorable Chairperson, I couldn't understand the minister when he said the date's going to be changed from 1 January 2023 to 1st January 2023.
Honorable Minister.
1st
thank you.
June 2023.
Honorable members, I think it will also assist if you stop sitting and chatting away while the Deputy Minister is on the podium on both sides. From there where you're sitting, Honorable Singh, and from this side. So you tend to lose the track of the discussion. But there's a concern expressed, Honorable Deputy Minister, about the date. Can you just clarify that, please? And can we please follow the debate? Honorable Deputy Minister, will you continue?
So thanks, Chair. The delay is from 1st January 2023 to 1st June 2023. Like I said, Chair, that we've also announced the tax rate trajectory to give policy certainty over the short, medium, and long term in order to help create a more certain policy environment that will encourage investments towards a green economy. The move towards a lower carbon future has the opportunity to create new areas of production that can create economic growth. Chair, I really want to thank all again for your time and commitment in helping us strive to create a tax system that raises the revenue we need as a country in a manner that leads to increased levels of employment, improved health outcomes, and economic growth. I thank you, Chair and honorable members.
Thank you, Honorable Deputy Minister. That concludes the debate. Are there any objections? Order, honorable members. Are there any objections to the rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill being read a first time?
House Chair, please note the objection of the Democratic Alliance.
Objection is noted. Are there any further objections?
Please note
Yes.
the ACDP, Chair. Thank you.
ACDP,
And Chairperson, also the objection of the FF plus.
the FF plus,
Please note the objection of the EFF.
it's noted. Honorable members, and with those objections, the rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill is agreed to. The secretary will read the bill a first time.
Rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill.
Are there any objections to the taxation laws amendment bill being read the first time?
Please note the objection of the DA.
Noted.
Please note the
objection of the EFF.
EFF,
Please note the objection of the FF plus.
it's noted.
And the ACDP, thank you, Chair.
Noted. And with those objections noted, the taxation laws amendment bill is agreed to, and the secretary will read the bill a first time.
Taxation laws amendment bill.
Are there any objections to the tax administration laws amendment bill being read a second time?
Please note the objection of the DA.
Noted.
Please note the objection of the EFF.
Noted.
Please note the objection of the FF plus.
Noted.
And the ACDP, please note the objection of the ACDP. Thank you.
And with those objections, the bill is agreed to, and the secretary will read the bill a second time.
Tax administration laws amendment bill.
The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. The secretary will read the seventh order.
Second reading, rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill.
As there is no list of speakers, are there any objections to the bill being read a second time?
House Chair, please note that the DA casted a report.
Please note the objection of the EFF.
Are there any further objections?
Yes, please note the objection of the FF plus.
It's noted.
Please note the objection of the ACDP. Thank you.
Thank you. And with those objections, the question is agreed to, and the secretary will read the bill a second time.
Rates and monetary amounts and amendment of revenue laws bill.
The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. The secretary will read the eighth order.
Second reading, the taxation laws amendment bill.
As there is no list of speakers, are there any objections to the bill being read a second time?
House Chair, please note the objection of the DA.
Noted.
Please note the objection of the EFF. We are
Yeah.
intimidate to Chief Whip, Chair.
I think the chief whip is preempting.
And
Are there
Chairperson,
any
please.
further objections?
Yes, Chairperson, please note the objection of the FF plus.
It is noted. Are there any further objections? With those objections, the question is agreed to. The secretary will read the bill a second time.
Taxation Laws Amendment Bill.
The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. The secretary will read the ninth order.
Consideration of report of Portfolio Committee on Police on protection of constitutional democracy against terrorists and related activities amendment bill.
I now recognize the Honorable Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, I move that this House adopts this report. Thank you.
Thank you. The motion is that the report be adopted. Are there any objections? No objections. Agreed to. The secretary will read the 10th order.
Second reading debate. Protection of constitutional democracy against terrorists and related activities amendment bill.
I now call upon the Honorable Minister of Police to introduce the debate. The Honorable Minister.
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Honorable Chair, honorable members, call observed. Despite the major terrorist attacks on the international level, which occurred prior and subsequent to September 11, 2001, such an attacks in Washington and New York.
Honorable Minister, since you are in a sitting of the National Assembly, I kindly request you to remove your hat.
That's done, Chairperson.
Thank you. There will be an opportunity for farewell speeches next week, Honorable Minister, and then you can gladly wear your hat.
I would love that opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. On African soil, the almost simultaneous bombing on the 7th August 1998 in front of the United States embassies in Nairobi, Kenya, and Dar es Salaam and Tanzania was a stark reminder that no country is immune from terrorist attack. 224 people died in the blast and more than 4,500 were wounded. In the adoption of the effective legislation to counter terrorist attacks and international terrorism in general, including the financing of terrorism, South Africa had the advantage of South African Law Reform Commission project to review the Internal Security Act 1982 in the aftermath of the global response to the international terrorism. The South African Law Reform Commission produced a comprehensive report which led to the adoption of the Protection of the Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorists and Related Activities Amendment Act 2004, Act number 33 of 2004. The most serious terrorist threat during the transitional period in South Africa was the Boremach case, which occurred before the adoption of the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorists and Related Activities Act 2004, but led to the various convictions for treason. Since then, there have been isolated incidents in South Africa, which were indicative that effective legislation to counter terrorism is necessity in South Africa. Juan Mohammed was arrested in South Africa and handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigations and was convicted and sentenced to life imprisonment in the United States for having actively participated in the perpetration for the bombing of the Dar es Salaam embassy. There had also been 5 convictions in respect of terrorism-related activities, namely that of Tulsi twins, who pleaded guilty of trying to leave South Africa to join the Islamic State in Syria. Tony Lee Tulsi was sentenced to 11 years in prison, and his brother, Brandon Lee, received 8 years prison sentence. 2 members of the National Christian Resistance Movement, called as Crusaders, who were plotting the murder of Black people as well as overthrowing the government, Eric Donald Abrahams 55 and Errol Abrahams 50, were found guilty and sentenced to 8 years imprisonment for planning terrorist activities. The Abrahams brothers also received a 5-year sentence for financing terrorism, unlawful possession of prohibited firearms, unlawful possession of firearms, and unlawful possession of ammunition, and unlawful possession of more than 200 cartridges running concurrently with sentence of 8 years. Harry Johannes Hussein, 64, who led and formed part of the Crusaders organization that planned and conspired to overthrow the democratically elected government of South Africa and replacing it with government led by the organization. This objective was to carry out attacks on military and police installation, as well as informal settlement occupied by African people. He was also convicted and is awaiting sentences and is awaiting the sentence. Harry Emotimi Oka, a citizen of Nigeria, was charged with 13 counts relating to terrorism under the protection of constitutional democracy against terrorists and related activities. 6 counts arose from 2 car bombs detonated successfully in Wari, Nigeria on the 15th, 2010. 6 additional counts related to the further double car bombing 6 months later in Abuja, Nigeria on the 1st October 2010. 1 person was killed in the Wari bombings, and at least 8 people were killed in the Abuja bombings. Injuries and damages in both bombings were extensive. He was sentenced to a term of imprisonment of 24 years. Constitutional Court in this matter confirmed the constitutionality of the extraterritorial jurisdiction provided for in the Act. The methods by which terrorism is being committed have evolved over time, leading to new international instruments to ensure that uniform crimes are developed globally aimed at bombing, hijacking, of aircraft and airplanes, attacks against ships and fixed platforms at sea, the financing of terrorism, hostage taking, and attacks against diplomatic personnel. The international law developed in this regard from 12 conventions and protocols adopted before 2004 to a total number of 19 such conventions and protocols. In addition, there are also regional counterterrorism conventions and protocols, such as Organization of African Unity Convention on the Prevention and Combating of Terrorism and subsequent protocols adopted by the African Union. In addition, the international law is further supplemented by binding resolution of the United Nations Security Council taken under Chapter 7 of the United Nations. While South Africa is a member of the Eastern and Southern African Anti-Money Laundering Group and the Financial Action Task Force, which also published a report on the mutual compliance visit to South Africa in October 2021. Whilst the FAFT recommendations do not constitute international law, they are binding on South Africa by virtue of the fact that South Africa has given its political commitment to the implementation of the FAFT recommendations and to subject itself to the FAFT peer review in the form of the mutual evaluation and the follow-up processes. As a FAFT member, South Africa is required to demonstrate full compliance with all its guidance. With subsection 1.4 in the Principal Act specifically, South Africa was found to be partially compliant on the implementation, and this contributed to the rating of the low level of enforcement of terror financing. Given the severe consequences where a peer review shows that TAF member is unwilling to implement the TAF recommendation, and in South Africa's case, it will result in being put on the grey list, which means that these recommendations should be regarded as binding on South Africa.
Honorable Minister, there's another member also on the platform, the Honorable Peterson. Can you just mute that member's microphone, please, as it's disrupting the speech of the minister?
Thank you.
Please continue, Honorable
The
Minister.
Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorists and Related Activities Amendment Bill 2022 is aimed at aligning the Act with the latest international law requirements and to establish the crimes and define it as a subsequent international instrument. It furthermore responds to the issues raised in respect of the Act following the respective compliance visits. The bill is, in particular, provides for the repeal of the exclusion of just liberation struggles from the definition of terrorism activities, the repeal of the motive requirements and respect of terrorism activity, provides for combating cyber terrorism, provides for the combating the phenomenon of foreign terrorist fighters, and enhances the freezing of assets related to the funding of support of terrorism activity. The bill also provides for the penalties aligned to the seriousness of an offense. It is therefore clear that effective legislation to counter terrorism and adhere to the convention and protocols which South Africa is party to is a necessity to protect the Republic and its citizens from terrorist and related attacks.
Honourable Minister, your time has now expired. Thank you. The next speaker is the Honourable Jumat Peterson.
Honorable House Chairperson, Honorable Chief Whip, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, members of the House. Last week, the House considered the second reading debate on the general laws anti-money laundering and combating terrorism financing. The Honorable Minister of Finance referred to the protection of constitutional democracy against terrorist-related activities bill. As the second piece of the legislation is needed to avoid possible grey listing. Indeed, as the Honorable Minister of Finance noted, the processing of both these bills shows the commitment of government and parliament to not only avoid grey listing, but also to root out corruption in South Africa. This is indeed a collective responsibility. Although the two bills speak to each other and are both instrumental in our legislative framework of counter-terrorism, the two bills differ fundamentally, as one is administered by the Minister of Finance and the other by the Minister of Police. Honorable Chief Whip, Honorable House Chairperson, we wish to thank the Minister for bringing this bill to the committee. It was a very difficult bill. It was highly technical. We received over 26,000 public submissions. So we really did a thorough work in terms of public consultation. It does not only address the issues identified in the mutual evaluation process related to possible grey listing, but it also looks at the deficiencies identified by the United Nations Counterterrorism Executive Directorate. In addition to all the requirements which were given to us by the United Nations, we have then looked at the disparity between the sentencing regime in terms of which a more severe penalty may be imposed in respect of money laundering as opposed to terrorist financing, and the lack of any reference to administrative sanctions for violating asset freezing orders. In addition, Poktatara Bill addresses the findings made in 2019 with a mutual evaluation conducted by the Financial Action Task Force of its anti-money laundering and combating of the financing of terrorism system. As was stated during last week's second reading debate on the General Laws Anti-Money Laundering Combating Terrorism Amendment Bill, South Africa was rated poorly in the mutual evaluation report published in October 2021. The Poktatara Bill addresses two deficiencies identified during the mutual evaluation, and as such, the bill is a fundamental component to avoid this grey listing and the effectiveness of our system to address the risk of money laundering. The deficiencies that must be addressed in Poktatara relate largely to terrorist funding, sanctions related to terrorism, terrorist financing, freezing orders, and the publication of notices by the United Nations Security Council. Under the terrorism amendment related activities bill, there are two core areas which we are considering and covering, which is absolutely required for our country to avoid grey listing. But even though we wanted to avoid grey listing, Honorable Chief Whip, Honorable House Chair, we did I want to re-emphasize, we did not rush through this bill. We even extended the term for public consultations. Those who were complaining that there was a particular agenda against certain individuals, institutions, it is actually not true. And I would like to allow all the members of the House to read this bill, because it is one of the most important bills that will be passed since our constitution was amended. Under the apartheid regime, terrorism was related to everything that was black. So if Janus Wallus was a black person and Chris Hani was a white person, if Janus Wallus killed Chris Hani under apartheid and he was black, he would have been called a terrorist. But now, Janus Wallus was sentenced under an apartheid law. But after the new constitution, his life sentence through hanging was converted to life imprisonment. So he, in fact, has his life and owes his life to this ANC government. So this is what the bill, in essence, this is what the bill is covering. The definition of who and what is a terrorist. So it was a very uncomfortable reminder of those who are on the right of my right-hand side of the House, who were ordinarily convinced, the public was convinced that all of those sitting on this side were terrorists, commonly because they were black, secondly because of the Swart Gevaar, thirdly because they were communists and they then had to be killed. So now, honorable members, I'm not speaking about anything on the side. So please don't say that I'm casting any aspersions. But for us now to have this, after we have had this detailed public participation, international organizations came to speak to the committee. So this bill is long overdue. It comes at a correct time. And I wish to then say, Honorable Chief Whip, that we as an ANC government and as ANC cadres can correctly say, I want to complete and come back to this, that what is very important is that, honorable members, let me say, comrades, this bill, we can safely say to the widow of our comrade Chris Hani, your tears have not been in vain. We cannot go any further. Our liberation struggle was not in vain. We cannot go any further with certain people seen as terrorists, as our legal state advisor, the Office of the State Law Advisor, National Treasury, and the Financial Intelligence Center, and our committee staff actually worked and sifted through. We went through this literally word by word, because no one after democracy, unless you are legally found to be a terrorist, should be deemed a terrorist on the basis of your skin color. The committee is confident that the bill was processed in line with the rules of the National Assembly and the legislative processes were well executed. Honorable members, I wish to thank the opposition for all their hard work. We met twice a week to actually do our work as a committee and process the bill. I would like to thank all the members of the committee who worked diligently. We know we pushed them out. I wish to thank our honorable chief, our chief whip. Thank you for having patience with us. And then I would like to thank the minister and the deputy minister. The deputy minister, we had more than 11 meetings on this bill. The deputy minister attended each and every meeting. The minister received a report after each and every meeting. This was the type of interest we had as an ANC government on what was happening in this bill. The staff who worked tirelessly, particularly Ms. Nicolette van Zyl-Gous, she did a sterling job. We as the committee really owe her our gratitude. The entire team of Mr. Ramaro in the civilian secretariat, the legal advisor in the civilian secretariat, Ms. Bell, and the team, we made changes, we worked right through the night, and we wanted to meet the deadline without doing shoddy work. I can safely say, Honorable Minister of State Security, you have your bill. Honorable Minister of Police, you have your bill. Honorable Minister of Finance, you have your bill. Honorable Chief Whip, Honorable House Chair, the ANC supports this bill.
Thank you, Honorable Member. The next speaker is the Honorable Whitfield.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson. Honorable members, our primary responsibility as members of Parliament is to legislate, to make good laws and pass good laws that are good for our country and for her people. There is a duty of extreme care which should be given to this responsibility, and no amount of executive pressure should force this House to pass bad laws. Sadly, this House, for the most part, defers to the executive when it comes to legislation, rather than being the originator of legislation within our own committees. In this particular instance, while I have several concerns surrounding the bill which remain, I want to commend the members of the committee for making several constructive inputs which have resulted in the bill effectively becoming a committee bill. The chairperson of the committee is also to be thanked for acceding to our request to reopen the public participation process, which yielded excellent additional inputs from the committee for the committee to consider. A major victory for the committee was the deletion of Section 3A, a section which the DA vehemently opposed. This section dealt with the prohibition of publication of materials and would have unreasonably limited a person's right to freedom of expression, which would have led to arbitrary abuse. The DA also raised concerns on Sections 24A and 24B, which would have led to a violation of freedom of expression and certainly a violation of the Audi Alterum Partem rule, and these sections too were deleted. The bill, however, in spite of some improvements, remains problematic and will cause anxiety among South Africans due to the fact that in many instances, the police often abuse their existing powers and responsibilities and are now being given more. This was proven during the initial COVID-19 lockdown period, and this bill gives rise to those fears that the SAPs may arbitrarily violate the freedoms of those who challenge the state, and arrests may be made purely for political means or reasons, as the reality sets in for the ANC that it is going to fall below 50%. The state has failed to address why existing legislation cannot already deal with crimes relating to terrorism, nor why the Criminal Procedure Act falls short in allowing the SAPs to adequately operate in relation to terrorist activities. We cannot legislate for bad police work. We need to strengthen the capabilities and skills of our police service so that we create an environment in which terrorism and related activities, specifically money laundering, cannot proliferate. The committee and the public raised concerns regarding the definition of terrorism, which remains problematic in the bill. And given more time, I believe that the committee could have found consensus on a definition. Despite the committee's efforts to address these and other shortcomings in the bill and to extend the process to sufficiently address these, it was very clear from the onset that this executive bill was to be expedited through Parliament purely to avoid grey list. This bill was introduced in Parliament on the 19th of July 2022, 9 months after the publication of the Mutual Evaluation Report by the Financial Action Task Force in October 2021. And here we are just 4 months since its introduction in July to pass it. The Paktatara bill has been on the schedule of bills since 2018. And so, much like the DNA bill, which sat in cabinet since 2017 and was only passed this year, it appears that the executive continues to sleep on the job, resulting in knee-jerk reactions which place pressure on Parliament. These two bills demonstrate very clearly that when it comes to legislation, Parliament should not be waiting for the executive to wake from its slumber. Most of the contentious and contested amendments in the bill were not specifically required by the Mutual Evaluation Report, and there was general agreement by the public and many members of the committee that many of the technical amendments were not problematic and that they should be separated from the other amendments in order to ensure that we find consensus to pass the bill unanimously. My request to separate these amendments and only deal with those amendments affecting grey listing so that we can debate the contested amendments further at another time was not supported. Now, as I conclude, House Chair, I would like to express my concern that should this bill be signed into law in its current format, that there may very well be serious implications for freedom in our country as the political landscape changes towards 2024. We must make laws that are good for our country's future, not just its immediate present. We need to have a vision for that future and put our country, its people, and their freedoms first. Dealing with this bill, I was reminded of the immortal words of esteemed legislator and philosopher Edmund Burke, words which should echo in the hearts and minds of all legislators. And he said, and I quote, "Bad laws are the worst form of tyranny."
Honorable Whitfield, your time has expired. Thank you. The
DA will
Honorable
not support
Shepeni.
this bill.
Thank you, Chairperson. Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, the EFF welcomes and is in support of the Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorists and Related Activities Amendment Bill. The fight against terrorism requires global solidarity, not just against those the West defines as enemies, but against all those intent on causing destruction in the lives of millions of the people. South Africa is not immune to these global threats of terrorism and is in fact vulnerable to being used as a conducive or as a conduit of terrorist funds and fighters because of our weak security mechanisms. We also appreciate that this bill is an attempt to meet the international standards set by the Financial Act Task Force, a global anti-terrorism and anti-money laundering standards body. This body had, as far back in 2021, highlighted that South Africa has fallen behind some key legislative aspects relating to global financing of terrorism and risks grey listing if these are not addressed. While legislative development should never ever be imposed by external bodies, this piece of legislation is needed to deal with the always imminent threat to terrorism in this country. We are particularly pleased with the extension of police powers to investigate offenses in respect of entering, departing from, or transiting through, or remaining in any country for purposes of joining or supporting terrorist groups. This would address the problem of having foreign terrorist fighters using our country as a base from which to launch their activities and destabilization actions elsewhere. Equally, we are in support of the provision that makes it an offense to hold or facilitate the holding of property on behalf of persons or entities known to be pursuing terrorist activities. In light of the involvement of South Africans, particularly white former SANDF operatives in terrorist and mercenary activities around the world, we are in support of the criminalization and strong penalties for those who want to leave this country to wage unholy wars outside the country for a profit. This must extend to developing strong domestic capabilities to investigate and detect training of these terrorists and mercenaries inside the country. Most of these training activities are disguised as self-defense actions by a few farmers. The reality, however, is that some white people are training each other for war, either inside or outside the country. The government must be able to deal with them in as comprehensive manner as possible. Our country's experience and development of the law after the arrest and detention of Henry Oka should have knocked some sense of agency to develop comprehensive legislation to deal with non-nationals who come to this country with the sole purpose of organizing terrorist activities in their own countries. We need a proactive crime foreign intelligence capacity to detect these sorts of crimes. The destruction of both the crime intelligence capacity and the use of the state security agency for narrow political interest of the ruling elite is a present and future danger of the country's security. We are, however, not pleased with the blanket exclusion of academics and journalists from scrutiny for possessing material that may be used for terrorist purposes. While we understand that some academics study the terrorism phenomenon and that some journalists genuinely report on these activities, we do think that those must be carefully prescribed so as not to allow the use of these professions by people with all ill intent. We are in support of the bill and convinced that it would make the country compliant with its international obligations. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We proceed to the Honorable Majosi.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. We live
Honorable
in a day and
Majosi,
age.
before you proceed. Honorable Masonto, on the virtual platform, you have been appearing, I don't know how many times now. Please, those who have got his number, just call her. Who have got a number, please. Thank you. Proceed, Honorable Majosi.
Thank you, Honorable House Chair. We live in a day and age where terrorism and its related horrific activities are a reality which must be actively countered by capable nation, state intelligence and police services. Cooperation and information sharing partnerships with aligned intelligence agencies from other nation states should not only be encouraged, but actively pursued if we are to capably prevent terror cells from flourishing within our borders, striking their targets both nationally and internationally. Such casualties are usually in a form of innocent victims who fall prey as collateral damage to their diabolical ideologies. For far too long, South Africa, through its policies of non-intervention in the fight against global terrorism, has allowed terrorism to flourish at times within our borders. Well, now we find ourselves in an unfavorable position of having both terror cells training and operating not only in our neighboring states, but also reportedly within our borders. Since 2017, the province of Cabo Delgado in Mozambique has been under sustained terror attacks from the terror groups ASWJ, which has reportedly pledged its allegiances to the Islamic State and now conduct its operation under the directive of the Islamic State Central Africa. This group, as of the end of this year, or end of last year, was primarily responsible for the deaths of 4,000 civilians and the displacement of 670,000 people. South African nationals were amongst the most significant number of foreign nationals affected by the violence. And 43 South African citizens required emergency evacuation and medical care. South African citizen Adrian Nel was the first South African to be brutally killed by members of the ASWJ when attacked a lodge in Palma. We can no longer stand by with our posture of non-interventionism in our terror-related activities, training and recruitment within and without our borders. South Africans involved with such organizations, as well as terrorists who are foreign nationals, but currently within our borders, should find no safe haven or refuge here. Chairperson, South Africa remains a fertile ground for terrorists actively with our porous borders. The widespread public service corruption, particularly in our security cluster and in the localized offices of Home Affairs. It is also no secret that Funding of terrorist activities is often secured within our borders and has been since a reported leak of the classified NIA report in 1998, which details the fundraising effort of certain individuals linked in the Taliban and other religious extremist group. Violent extremism has no place in South Africa. Its neighboring state nor any democracy in the rest of the world and should be met with equal and opposite lawful response justly executed by our SAPS and other organs of our state security apparatus. Duly empowered and legislation such as is presented the bill before us. We must remember, however, that with such great power comes even greater responsibility by those that wield it. The bill and its powers, once enacted, must not be abused or used as political weapons by those that push political agendas and who might seek to weaponize these powers against political opponents. Subject to the above serious concern, the IFP supports the bill. I thank you, Chair.
Thank you. The Honorable Dr. Groenewald. The Honorable Groenewald.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Chair, I want to start by saying that the aim of this amendment bill is part of the process to ensure and to prevent that South Africa is not grey listed. So yes, it is an important bill, and it is good that we amended the bill. I also want to put on record, Honorable Chair, that I can't think that there will be anyone that is against the fact that we have to fight terrorism. And therefore, I can say and put it very categorically that the Freedom Front Plus also believe that the fight against terrorism should be improved, and we had the situation depend on alert from the United States intelligence services in terms of a threat in South Africa. That is not a good sign for the intelligence services of South Africa. Yes, I understand the minister tried to defend it, but the fact of the matter is it is a serious problem as far as crime and terrorism is concerned in South Africa. But, Honourable Chair, looking at this amendment bill, I want to quote specifically the substitution of subsection 5, and it reads as follows: notwithstanding any provision in any other law, a political, philosophical, ideological, racial, ethnic, religious, or any similar motive shall not be considered for any reason, including for purposes of prosecution or extradition, to be a justifiable defense in respect of an offense of which the definition of terrorist activity forms an integral part. Now, Honourable Chair, that is the problem what the Freedom Front Plus have with this bill. I can assure you, one, and I say one, of the motives of the Freedom Front Plus is that we have a political motive to ensure that the ANC, and if you look at this definition and this wording, then it is quite clear that a government can misuse this clause to act against opponents, and by that undermining the democracy of South Africa. Ek wil dit baie duidelik stel, agbare voorsitter, dat daar's baie aspekte. Kom ek verwys byvoorbeeld na artikel 235, bepaalde kultuurgemeenskap het die reg tot selfbeskikking. Dit kan baie maklik geïnterpreteer word deur die regering, spesifiek die ANC regering, dat dit deel is van 'n terroristiese aksie. En 'n mens kan nooit die ANC as 'n regering vertrou nie. En daarom, agbare voorsitter, sal die Vryheidsfront Plus nie hierdie wetsontwerp ondersteun nie. Ons stem daarteen, want die ANC kan nie vertrou word met hierdie tipe van sensitiewe wetgewing in hulle hande nie. Ek dank u.
Baie dankie. This time, I'm not sure whether I should call Reverend Mishe or Reverend Three. Whoever.
Honorable House Chair, Honorable
Yes.
House Chair, the Reverend Meshwe is having some connectivity challenges, so I will be speaking on his behalf.
Yes, that's why I said that, because I was informed. Thank you. Honorable Three, proceed.
Thank you, House Chair. Honorable House Chairperson, the ACDP is aware of the need to amend certain definitions of the Principal Act so as to bring it in line with the developments in international law and constitutional court judgments. Additionally, we understand the need to address the problem of terrorism and simultaneously prevent the grey listing of South Africa with its resultant economic consequences. The ACDP notes that the Portfolio Committee on Police received 7 public submissions on the Paktatara bill, and submissions made raise serious concerns with some of the amendments. The ACDP asserts that clause 1 of the bill relating to the definition of terrorist activity is too broad and raises our concern that this wide definition has the potential to enable the state to criminalize normal citizens who criticize or challenge the government's policies or legislation as encouragement or indirect facilitation of terrorism. We concur with 4SA, who have proposed that clause 3 relating to the prohibition of publication with unlawful terrorism-related content be scrapped due to the limitation of constitutionally protected speech. We further caution that the provisions which intend to grant greater powers to the police may infringe unfairly on many fundamental rights, including the rights to freedom of religion, expression, and association. The House must be reminded that in terms of Section 8(1) of the Constitution, the Bill of Rights applies to all law and binds the state, including Parliament, and that Section 7(2) requires the state to respect, protect, promote, and fulfill all the rights in the Bill of Rights. The ACDP believes that this bill, in its current form, opens the door for widespread abuse to silence and imprison critics of the government or its policies. We do not have to look far for examples, for in 2022, it was reported that internal emails within the Department of Health describe groups opposed to government's proposed health regulations as instigating terrorism and sabotage. This is a clear indication of how this bill could potentially be used to criminalize normal citizens. The ACDP does not support this amendment bill. I thank you.
Thank you. UDM? ATM? Honorable Sheikh Imam?
Thank you, House Chairperson. I want to ask for your indulgence. I'm still on the road. Thank you very much. So my video will be off. Chairperson, I think, you know, what is very clear that we as a government are under tremendous pressure, and that has been made.
Are you still there, Honorable Mansour?
Will not criticize or condemn acts of regime change and terrorism against other ordinary civilians or regime change in many, many nations all over the world. It is also very clear that with the grey listing, the added pressure that we have been put on recently. Now, when you look at this bill, yes, indeed, I must admit that there are terrorist threats in South Africa, in the SADC region, in the continent itself, but all over the world. Yes, indeed. Now, what this bill does not address or deal with is particularly international communities that fund institutions or organizations who are terrorist organizations in their own right by changing regimes and things in different countries, violating the rights of human beings all over. But those are the very same people that are funding institutions in South Africa, NGOs, NPOs, civil society organization, political parties and things, and very little or nothing happens about that. The second thing is a concern we have is, does the South African Police Services have the capacity, first of all, to understand this bill in its entirety, to be able to implement it? And then the other concern, of course, is will they have the necessary financial resources to be able to do that as well? And the answer is clearly no, they do not have the necessary capacity. You know, South African police is currently having great difficulty even dealing with cybercrime, which is something new. And here we are introducing something else, which we clearly believe that the South African police services will not be able to do. The other problem, of course, that we have is exactly what is this bill trying to achieve? Are we talking about terrorists to what extent? What activities conducted by individuals or NGOs or NPOs or institutions or society will be regarded as terrorist activities and not? Now, this is what is very, very important for us to understand. And then we have another added problem, and that is the suppression of information, particularly when it comes to the media and things. So the National Freedom Party has serious concerns about this. However, we want to reiterate that any attempt to deal with terrorism anywhere in the world must be dealt with. But let us equally be mindful of the rights of those people that are becoming terrorists because they've got no other option but to become terrorists to protect their own rights. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you. The Honorable Peacock.
Honorable House Chair, a special greetings to the Chief Whip of the Majority Party and to all our members. What's your issue? Thank you. The area that gathered the most resistance in deliberation of the Port Kadara bill was on the definition of terrorist activity as defined in the Principal Act. The actual amendments proposed in the bill was only to insert the use of weapons of mass destruction in terrorist activities and actions intended to overthrow our government or any other government. The concerns were based on the broadness of the definition and was regarded as a catch-all provision. It was important to get this right, as the definition of terrorist activities is the core of the entire act. After significant deliberation, we accepted that the approach towards the definition was crafted in 2004 had to be isolate actual terrorism from other crimes to effectively combat terrorist activities. The particular offense established in terms of existing international instruments, but also to be proactive, to provide a general definition which is wide enough to combat terrorism, but not too wide to allow abuse of legislation for other purposes than combating terrorism. To ensure a prosecution under the Port Kadara, two principles must be present. First, an act must be committed, and second, the intent must be proven. This is the crux of the definition of the terrorist activity. Although it is broad, the intent must be proven. Honorable House Chair, we have significantly appreciate also the public submission received, and the majority of the comments were incorporated into the bill. Naturally, the committee could not accept all the submission as some arguments were just plainly ill-conceived. For instance, the Agri-Forum argued the proposed deletion of section 25 and 26 of the Principal Act unjustifiably violates the doctrine of the separation of powers by removing parliamentary supervision in terms of resolutions of the UN Security Council. Had they considered their approach, they would have realized that Parliament does not have the power to amend, approve, or reject the resolution by the UN Security Council. The deletion merely brought the publication of proclamation in line with the existing requirements of the FIC Act. In practice, the publication of notification was done by the president, but it has proven to be a cumbersome process that also delayed the publication of such notices. Honorable House Chair, as the committee, we have listened to the public during public participation process and have improved the bill. We have inserted definition of crypto asset as used in the definition of property to clarify reference to money, movables, immovables properties, corporeal and incorporeal things. Crypto asset and any rights, privileges, claims, and securities, and any interest therein, and all process thereof as submission by the Banking Association of South Africa. And we have included that the provisioning of terrorist-related training is an offense, and not only receiving such training, and that such training is the offense, whether in person, online, or in any other matter. We thank the stand for pointing out this important issue. The committee has deleted the proposed insertion of section 3.8 relating to the prohibition of publication with unlawful terrorist-related contents. The deletion was based on concerns to the freedom of expression and potential constitutional challenges. The committee has further deletion of section 24 relating to the application for description direction, as this is already captured in the Cybercrime Act. And we have reviewed the proposed insertion of section 24B relating to orders to disable access to internet or social media sites. The clause now refer to others to the take down or disable access to tourism publication and is more in line with the protection of individual rights. Honorable House Chair, in conclusion, we believe that through this bill, counter-terrorist related legislation is strengthened significantly and not only bring our legislation on par with international counterparts, but also protect our constitutional democracy against terrorist and related activities. I thank you.
Thank you. The AIC, Cope, Al-Jama, the Honorable Terra Blanche.
Honorable Chairperson, this is indeed an important bill. South Africa is on the brink of being grey-listed by the international community, all while the country is already desperately struggling to stay afloat economically. This is yet another example where
Order,
timers
honorable members.
and proactive steps were ignored, putting us in an awkward position as usual again. During a compliance visit by the United Nations Counter-Terrorism Executive Directorate in 2018, and the 2019 Financial Action Task Force findings, the country rated poorly in that it failed in 20 of the 40 FATF core standards and in all 11 effective measures scoring moderately low. Therefore, the bill and other general laws like the anti-money laundering and combating terrorism financing were submitted to Parliament for urgent processing. Die openbare deelnameproses was wyd geadverteer en het baie groot belangstelling uitgelok. Deur South Africa alleen het 25,652 persone verteenwoordig. Deelnemers se doel was uitsluitlik om bestaande regte te probeer beskerm. Hulle was deurgaans bekommerd dat wysigings so vaag bewoord is dat vergrype deur die regering moontlik sou wees. Die volgende regte is dit wat hulle bekommer het: vryheid van godsdiens, vryheid van spraak, vryheid van assosiasie, vryheid van beweging, veiligheid, eiendomsregte en so voort. The threat of a possible grey listing of South Africa is very real. A research report initiated by Business Leadership South Africa indicates that there is an 85% possibility that this is likely to happen. The economic impact could be in the 1 to 3% range of GDP. An obvious question then is, what should be done to avert this from happening? A very short answer. Intervention by most spheres of government. The challenge is even bigger as far as the Poktakara bill is concerned. While the government belated effort is welcome, it is sadly a matter of too little, too late again. Extensive rebuilding of institutional capacity in various government departments is required and will have to be driven.
Honorable Chair Blanche, your time has expired.
The
Thank you.
DA do not support this bill. Thank you.
Motlhomphegi Seabe.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chief Whip of the Majority Party, ministers and deputy ministers present, honorable members in the House. There are 19 international and regional conventions and protocols aimed at counterterrorism to which the POCTATARA must conform. As a member state of the United Nations and the African Union, we are duty-bound to implement such measures that are required from member states, including the adoption of legislation to combat terrorism. As the Honorable Chairperson of the committee stated earlier, the UN has, in addition to the fact, identified deficiencies that must be addressed in our domestic counterterrorism legislation to aid in combating terrorism. Honorable members, terrorism is a serious offense under the Principal Act. There has been only 5 convictions since its enactment in 2004. These 5 convictions span a period of 18 years. The scarcity of convictions should not be seen as a failure, but rather an indication of the exceptional serious nature in which the offenses provided for in the Act are regarded. This is also aligned to the approach followed in other democratic legal systems. Honorable Chairperson, the seriousness of the offenses in terms of POCTATARA is further supported by Section 16 that requires the written authority of the National Director of Public Prosecution to institute a prosecution in terms of POCTATARA. The high threshold included in Section 16 emphasizes the serious and exceptional nature of prosecutions of this nature. The threat of arbitrary arrest and prosecution on terrorism-related challenges are extremely limited under POCTATARA. Honorable members, initially the committee considered to classify illegal mining as terrorism due to the enormous threat to the economy and the safety of communities. However, when we were advised by legal experts that it will not be advisable to classify this as terrorism, as the burden to prove intent will be significant in that the proceeds of illegal mining must be directed specifically to fund terrorist groupings. In theory, it means that the illegal mining may in future be prosecuted as terrorism if the NDPP is satisfied that the case will be proved and that the requirements of the amended offense are met. Instead, we have identified several deficiencies in the legislative framework to combat illegal mining, as these operations are currently able to thrive within an ineffective and fragmented regulatory framework. These are included in the consolidated report on oversight visit conducted by the portfolio committees on police, mineral resources and energy, and home affairs. These defects will be rectified to bring an end to illegal mining in South Africa. Honorable Chair, the concerns raised by members that the bill has been somehow fast-tracked due to failures of government to act timeously and now pushed through Parliament is blatantly untrue. We have dealt with the POCTATARA bill in detail and at length. The ANC support the bill and believe that it, together with the Principal Act, will ensure that South Africa is in a position to act decisively against terrorist attack or the support of terrorism activities. To the contrary, this bill is not about electioneering, but to make sure that the citizens of the country and the world feel safe when they are in the Republic of South Africa. There's no need for Honorable Whitfield and Groenewald and others to panic. It is this ANC government that repealed unpopular apartheid laws. It is this ANC government that said everybody is equal before the law. It is this ANC government that brought the notion of reconciliation, despite atrocities committed by the apartheid government against freedom fighters, who in the main are Black. Therefore, there's no need to ring alarm bells. The ANC support the bill.
Thank you. Honorable members, that concludes the debate. No, don't worry. Honorable members, are there any objections to the bill being read a second time?
Mhlali ngaphambili i-Democratic Alliance iyayichasa le bill.
Honorable member, you always try to confuse me. I said anyone who is objecting. Oh, means to object. Thank you for that. Okay. Oh, thank you.
And Chairperson, please note the objection of the FF Plus.
Noted.
And the objection of the ACDP, please, House Chair.
Thank you. Any other objections? No objections. The objections that were given will be noted. Thank you very much. The secretary will read the bill a second time.
Protection of Constitutional Democracy Against Terrorist and Related Activities Amendment Bill.
Thank you very much. The bill will be sent to the National Council of Provinces for concurrence. I will now allow the secretary to read the 11th order.
Consideration of report of ad hoc committee on flood, disaster relief and recovery.
Thank you. I will follow the speakers list and invite the Honorable House Chairperson Frolik.
Honorable House Chairperson, honorable members, on the 18th of April this year, a national state of disaster was declared by His Excellency the President in response to the severity and magnitude of floods in KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and Northwest provinces. We must also remind ourselves that floods and natural disasters have become the order of the day, as earlier in the year, youth sections of Southeast Australia, Los Angeles in the United States of America, and also lately Pakistan and Bangladesh have been affected by floods. The declaration by the President was in the main meant to facilitate the release of resources required to respond effectively to the disaster and to enable better disaster response coordination. In response, Parliament established a joint ad hoc committee on flood disaster relief and recovery, with the main objectives to focus, amongst others, in engaging the relevant government departments and entities to assess the overall impact of the damage, responses, and relief measures by the national departments. Also to oversee the response and implementation of the relief measures by the government, and to confer with the relevant committees, both at national, provincial, and local government, to facilitate coordinated oversight activities. The ad hoc committee undertook fact-finding oversight visits to the 3 affected provinces, but due to the extent of damage in KwaZulu-Natal, more time was spent there. In total, 10 government departments and entities, 3 provincial governments, and 7 municipalities and 2 Chapter 9 institutions were engaged. The ad hoc committee supplemented all its engagements in the provinces with specific in-loco inspections to the damage caused and an assessment of the current rehabilitation and reconstruction efforts. In total, more than 24 in-loco inspections have taken place, as well as an unannounced visit. The floods in April and May caused the most extensive devastation in KwaZulu-Natal, with 448 reported fatalities, and honorable members, some of these bodies have not been recovered yet. The Eastern Cape was the second most affected, where 7 people lost their lives, and it was the Port St. John's municipality or area in the OR Tambo district that was affected the most. The Northwest was least affected, but most of the damage could be seen in uninhabitable areas, such as Deelpan village. The floods also disproportionately affected marginalized communities, with particular devastation in informal settlements, especially those in flood-prone areas such as floodplains. The flood warnings had a limited reach, and those communities who received the warning notices of the impending flooding havoc did not seem to know what to do under the circumstances. Much confusion existed around the R1 billion in the form of a National Emergency Response Fund that was announced by the President to provide immediate relief. The initial impression was that the R1 billion was dedicated to KwaZulu-Natal, while subsequent briefings indicated that it was envisaged as a national emergency response and not only for KwaZulu-Natal. In fact, the amount appropriated also falls short of the estimated 17.8 billion rand that is required to deal with the post-disaster recovery in KwaZulu-Natal only. While the declaration of the state of disaster was supposed to facilitate the release of resources required to respond effectively to the disaster and to enable better disaster response coordination, many of the presenters that we engaged stressed that none of these objectives were satisfactorily achieved. With exceptions, interdepartmental coordination and coordination amongst the 3 spheres of government have also been in the main poorly executed. The response by the relevant sector departments to the national state of disaster also lack the expected urgency and agility, as the announcement from the President indicated that we are dealing with a national disaster. In certain instances, the impact of the floods, as highlighted by many of the presenters, could have been mitigated by relatively inexpensive proactive measures, such as the regular cleaning and unblocking of waterways and culverts, and stricter implementation of municipal bylaws in respect of erecting settlement structures in unsuitable habitats. The general dilapidation of infrastructure due to aging and poor maintenance also exacerbated the impact. The impact of the support provided to municipalities to enable them to comply with the conditions and requirements for excess disaster relief funding have not been decisive. In a submission to the ad hoc committee, the Auditor General makes the following key finding, and I quote, "In summary, the government's overall responsiveness to the national disaster was very slow when measured against its plans," close quote. This finding is also being endorsed by the Human Rights Commission, who comes to the same conclusion. In respect of time, I wish to focus on some of the recommendations. The National Treasury and the National Disaster Management Center should improve the support provided to disaster-impacted organs of state to ensure that there is timely and accurate submission of funding requests, and to ensure that the quality of the submitted information is satisfactory. The NDMC in particular should also equip municipalities with the requisite skills to develop credible disaster management plans. And it should also further strive to ensure that all provinces meet a minimum set of requirements in terms of disaster response. It seems also as if the funding for disaster relief is hamstrung by legislative requirements to ensure prudent financial management as outlined in the PFMA and MFMA. The National Treasury and COCTA should work together to reconsider some of these provisions to ensure that funds are released immediately when a state of national disaster has been declared. And municipalities should enforce stricter implementation of bylaws to prevent the erection of human settlement structures in unsuitable habitats. 2 weeks ago, the Honorable Nyame and myself undertook an unannounced visit to some of the areas that were affected in KwaZulu-Natal. And to our horror, we found out at one of the mass care centers that the last visit that was done to the center was when the ad hoc committee was there. Now we must get away, Chief Whip, from all this fanfare of service delivery. Service delivery should not be an event. It should happen on a continuous basis. And they should not wait for parliamentarians to arrive when all of a sudden you see the MECs, you see the mayors and everyone there. It must happen on an ongoing basis. Finally, I want to state that the response from government departments has been mixed, but there are some shining lights, and some of the practices of the Ministry and Department of Public Enterprises is worth following. Finally, the Chairperson, there is a call from parties on the ad hoc committee, even though we have reported to re-establish this committee to finish the outstanding work. And I also want them to acknowledge the good work that has been done by the support staff to the committee and all the different role players who presented to this committee. We are also grateful for the extensive contributions of members of parliament and in most respect, their commitment, as well as the assistance that has been provided by the provincial governments and local municipalities where we went to do so.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
The Honorable McPherson.
Thank you, House Chair. The story of the floods that devastated KZN and parts of the Eastern Cape is a story of the worst of Mother Nature colliding with the incompetence of the ANC. It is a story of the most vulnerable of society being left to fend for themselves while politicians, ministers, mayors, premiers, and MECs promised action while delivering misery. There can be no doubt that when the first warnings were issued and ignored, the state let down residents at every turn. What this report attempts to paint in light brushstrokes is ANC government arrogance on a grand scale, where excuses came first and the needs of residents came last. Death and destruction from flooding like this was always going to be inevitable, but the suffering of those that lost loved ones and their homes did not have to be so profound. And the suffering originated when the president swooped into KZN on the 13th of April to promise 1 billion rand to assist in flood damage rebuilding. In a desperate moment for relevance and to be seen to be doing something, the president unleashed the crooked, corrupt, and worst elements within government, knowing that payday was just around the corner. Except from that very moment, the minister in the presidency and the Minister of Finance were desperately opening the drawers of government, trying to find the money their president had promised the public, only to find there was none. Chairperson, months and months of fighting, finger pointing, and disagreement in government hampered the rebuilding process. The former Premier of KZN, Sihle Zigalala, was scathing of the president and national government in our interactions with him, repeatedly telling the committee that no money was forthcoming. What the president did in his desperate attempt to seek adulation from the public was to create an unrealistic expectation that 1 billion rand was just an e-wallet away. But in truth, this disaster exposed the underbelly of our financial problems, that there was no contingency reserve funds available because they had been spent on SAA, Eskom, and other failed SOEs after years of ANC mismanagement. Fast forward to present day, 7 months after the disaster took place, and there are still 4,000 people living in shelters or community halls. And to quote from the report, it says the time being spent in shelters is fast becoming indefinite. Only 1,042 of the expected 4,100 temporary residential units have been built. The ANC is quickly condemning citizens to a life of zero dignity and further suffering. But why is this? Why has not more been done? And what happened to the money? A recent parliamentary reply from the president to the leader of the opposition revealed that 145 million rand of the provincial disaster response grant was never made available because no applications had been received from KZN. It further revealed that only 17% of the 326 million rand available from the provincial emergency housing grant had been used. Of the 460 million rand available from the municipal disaster response fund, only 25 million rand had been spent. And not a single rand from the 120 million rand municipal emergency housing grant has been spent because no applications have been made. And finally, of the reprioritized grants for the eThekwini municipality of nearly 464 million rand, little or no expenditure has taken place, according to the president. What sick kind of government doesn't spend money available to help the most desperate of society? An ANC government, of course. But there's a good reason why the ANC government and KZN don't want to spend this money. That's because the Auditor General and the ad hoc committee was watching them. They were unable to put money in their pockets. So instead of helping suffering people and spending money correctly, they chose not to, because ANC comrades couldn't make any money out of it. You have to be a special kind of heartless individual or organization to do that. But that's exactly what government has become. However, mark my words, now that the ad hoc committee has done its job, the corruption will start. Emergency procurement and Section 36 awards will start to be issued to fix what's broken, and then they'll claim victory. It's a sick game that the ANC governments have played, all at the expense of the most vulnerable. And the report fails to apportion blame to anyone for these failures, nor does it hold the eThekwini mayor responsible for his failure to lead a city through the flood disaster and now the latest crisis where large parts of the city are sinking in sewage, or the former KZN Cocta MEC, Sipho Tlamuka, who was entirely absent as the point person for the state of disaster in the province. He was too busy trying to find a job as a provincial official. In the end, this report is a monument to failure. ANC governments at all sphere that puts people last and which will not be forgotten by the time the elections come around in 18 months' time. I thank you, House Chair.
Thank you. The Honorable Mentor.
Mandibulele hlale ngaphambili. Today is rather one of those sad days where a very progressive report will mean absolutely nothing. And at first, I want to state categorically clear that we agree with the report and we welcome it. But Chairperson, it was in April this year when days of torrent rains left thousands of people in KwaZulu-Natal, the Eastern Cape and the Northwest destitute, without homes and without food. These floods left 455 people dead and almost 10,000 people were homeless. Ukuba besikwilizwe, Chief Whip, elikhathalayo, elinobuntu, elenza yonke into ngobunono nelikhathalele isizwe. Ngesithetha ukuba namhlanje yonke into eyayintlekele yenzeke KZN, Eastern Cape nase Northwest idlulile. Ayidluli ke kuba sibamnyama asikhathalelwanga ngurhulumente wethu omnyama. While the national state of disaster was declared on 18 April and this committee was established on the 11th of May, the response of the various levels and departments of government to this natural disaster provides a window through which the country should assess the suitability of the ruling party to govern this country. Chairperson, wafika umongameli KwaZulu-Natal wathembisa nge-1 billion rand. Le billion rand iqale yaba ngundaba mlonyeni isaziwa njengemali yase-KZN njengoba uchairperson etshilo. Kodwa kwabakho ukukhombana ngeminwe ukubana ngaba ngubani ofanele ukukhupha imali. Utreasury etyhola oomasipala ukuba abakwazi ukufaka izicelo zemali. Ngexesha sihlala apha sisithi le yintlekelele yelizwe, besithetha into yokokubana utreasury uqobo lwakhe makaphuma ebantwini. Besingakhange sathuma masipala, besingakhange sathuma province. Kodwa ke njengobana nibone, kwahlalwa inyangazane kukhonjana ngemini yokubana ngaba ngubani na oza kuya ebantwini. Urhulumente osiphetheyo norhulumente ongakhange asikhathalele. 4 months later, on the 12th of August, the National Treasury reported to have approved some provincial and municipal grants towards the relief of programs in the affected provinces. By government's own estimation and admission, over 18 billion is required to comprehensively deal with the humanitarian crisis caused by these floods in KZN alone. And yet the authorities have been unable to spend even the little that have been provided for. That is not the most horrifying of the neglect of government chairperson. It has been reported by Kokta that the departments can only work on the reprioritization of budgets in order to address the impact of these floods by only April 2023. Bazabe bepha abantu chief ngelo xesha. Kuzabe kusenzeka ntoni kubo? Abafundayo nababhalayo sithetha nje babhala phansi kwemeko emasikizi behlala kwezo zinto ezingamkelekanga nengazifanelanga abantu abaphilayo. 72 people are still missing in KwaZulu-Natal, and the government has all but stopped assisting the families to help search for these missing people. Abantu abahlala ePalm Ridge Hotel, ngabantu abazawukhethwa ngoluphi uhlobo, nabantu abatheni ngabatheni ke kufanele bahlale emaholweni, ingabatheni kufanele bahambe bawubekwe hotel. Ephondweni kumize ngaphezulu kuma-50 abakancedwana namhlanje liphondo likaChief Whip Eastern Cape. Apho imali eyaphumayo yaziwa kuphela ngabaphetheyo be-ANC uba yatshona phi. Ukubana ngaba sibuza imibuzo e-KZN sixelelwe ngokubana umhlaba ukafumaneki. EFF yayilapha inicela into yoba siphumeze i-constitution ezawuthi umhlaba mawuthathwe xa ufunwa ngabantu. Namhlanje abantu bafuna umhlaba ufumaneki. Sithatha ke elithuba sibulele umongameli we-EFF, sibulele ii-commissars nee-fighters zaKwaZulu-Natal ezithe ngexesha lokuba abantu bengakhathalelwanga ngumntu bolula isandla sabo bafaka oko kunqana abanokukufaka. Sithi nangomso fighters nibakhumbula abantu bakuthi kuba siya kwiChristmas basahlala kula maholo ningakulinge nibalibala. Chairperson, into eyenzeke eKZN into ibifanele bayenzeka nguba oomasipala bethu bebewenza umsebenzi wabo. Uba oomasipala bethu abantu abatya imali yokuba kuhambe kuyovulwa i-drainage, uba kuyovulwa imali yokuba indlela zisebenze ngendlela ephucukileyo nokuba amanzi aye ngaphi, bebebanjwa izitixo zilahlwe kude. Namhlanje ngesingathethi le nto siyithethayo. Into eyenziwa ngurhulumente kubantu base-DL Pan eNorthwest yinto engamkelekanga nengasoze iphinde yamkeleke. Isicelo sethu ke sosoba khanibe nobuntu. Abantu base-DL Pan kuzawuphinda kunethe baphinde bahlale emanzini, and ukuphuma kwabo kulamanzi abazukhutshelwe etyotyombe. Khuphana abantu base-DL Pan nibakhele imizi, bayakwazi uzakhela bancediseni. Siyabulela Chair.
Siyabulela.
National Chairperson.
Let me say at the outset, Honorable Chairperson, the IFP accepts this report. And the floods have devastated our provinces and had a disastrous effect on the lives of our citizens. The subsequent failure in disaster relief has highlighted that the intersectionality and extremity of the problems facing our country and our government. The problems swept away the facade that prior to these disasters, our government had been adequately maintaining its roads and infrastructure, effectively taking care of its rivers, people, and environment. The report correctly highlights how the impact of the floods was both exacerbated by the general dilapidation and poor maintenance and could have been mitigated through relatively inexpensive and proactive measures such as the cleaning of waterways and stricter enforcement of bylaws. Simply put, the basics have not been done for the longest of time. On 18 April 2022, a national state of disaster was declared in response to the severity and the magnitude of these floods. The purpose of this declaration was to enable a release of resources and facilitate more agile and effective coordination between different government departments as well as affected communities. It never happened. This said, the report highlights how the Public Finance Management Act and the Municipal Finance Management Act can present barriers to timeous and effective disaster relief, as several municipalities experience delays in accessing funding due to inadequate technical capacity or ability to complete even the most basic of requisite forms. A special dispensation for disaster situations should be considered. However, a lack of trust and transparency in government means safeguarding the release of these funds remains a priority and a challenge to a dynamic disaster relief strategy. The slow pace of government's response lacks the urgency of a national state of disaster and highlights an inability to address post-disaster recovery. eThekwini currently faces a sewage crisis as only 20% of their wastewater treatment plants are functional, resulting in the contamination of rivers and oceans. In KwaZulu-Natal, 4,983 dwellings were reported as destroyed. However, only 254 temporary residential units have thus far been built. Furthermore, the TRUs that were completed were done so that they are at an unacceptable standard, with 100% of the units being constructed as being defective. South Africans are left without psychosocial support to face the trauma of these events, while approximately 2,000 trained and unemployed social workers in KwaZulu-Natal remain unutilized. In considering this report, it must dawn on us that the development of a context-specific, credible and dynamic disaster management plan must be prioritized for each municipality. But it's a crime against humanity to steal money that is aimed at relieving our people from the worst of disasters. And really, we must applaud Parliament for taking a proactive step, but it must not end now. We need to continue with this oversight, because quite frankly, the challenges are many. Abantu basahlala emahholo, iy'ngane eziney'nkinga ey'koleni, abantu abanako ukudla, baphezu kosizi, imigwaqo ayiphelile, iy'ngqalasizinda zilungisiwe, ukufika kwemali kuhamba kancane. Ngakho-ke, I want to thank the chairperson of the NA and the NCOP and all my colleagues for the good work that we did. I think we worked well. Ngoba kwesinye isikhathi abantu bakithi abayidli ipolitiki, badla usizi, bahlupheka ekudinga ukuthi masifika la singapolitiki kodwa siyivume iy'nkinga ukuthi zikhona siyilungise. The IFP supports this report.
Thank you. Honorable Grunewald.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. When we speak of disaster management, we must start at its roots, which is disaster risk reduction. Why, may you ask, must we start at the roots? This is due to the fact that a big portion of the tragedy that we have seen in the recent floods could have been avoided if we had caring government that puts its people first. Let me give a few examples of how disaster risk reduction, specifically for flooding, is being implemented internationally. Dresden in Germany has a nature-based solution. This is generally referred to as sustainable management and use of nature for tackling societal and climate challenges, water and food security, human health, and disaster management. Indonesia, Italy, and Portugal all use educational materials, community engagements, workshop and training, social and other campaigns, exhibitions, and museums to educate and create a community-based awareness of floods and what to do should it happen as part of their readiness for disaster. South Africa's The Disaster Management Act gives a legislative responsibility to all three levels of government to develop, maintain, report, assess, plan, and review strategies, occurrences, awareness, and to fund it. If for any reason any of these structures cannot fulfill its mandate, it must be reported and must take any such steps as deemed necessary to secure compliance. But due to lawlessness, arrogance, and corrupt, power-hungry deployed ANC cadres who only attend to disasters after it happened, the loss is greater than it should be. The loss of infrastructure could have been less if maintenance plans were in place and adhered to. Humanitarian challenges could have been less was it properly planned for and had there been less corruption in the ANC government structures. Water could have been effectively provided had there not been local mafias that want the supply contracts. Had there been cooperation between departments and different levels of government and not a silo working approach, there could have been an effective and quick response. Citizens acted better, quicker, and more effective in a time of need than the ANC government. The true heroes of the disaster-stricken areas is not the non-caring, look at us, we give you R1 billion to save you government, but those citizens that had nothing and still assisted their neighbors, family, and friends. The government failed those citizens because it did not have disaster strategies and plans in place that had been reviewed and adjusted to save lives. The ANC did not comply with their own legislation. The ANC did not care enough to attend to matters that could save lives. The ANC is the monster robbing citizens of their right to safe and clean environment. The ANC is the monster robbing local economies to rebuild after a disaster. And the ANC is the monster that did not educate the children of this country on how to act in time of disaster. Shame on you. Agbare voorsitter, wetgewing is daar om burgers van die land te beskerm. Hier sien ons weer dat indien wetgewing nagekom is en die nodige planne in plek gestel is, vele lewens sonder twyfel gered sou kon word. Sou volhoubare herstelplanne in plek gewees het, sou werksverliese beperk kon word. Sou volhoubare strategie in plek gewees het, kon verder werksverliese, soos wat in die toerismebedryf in KwaZulu-Natal plaasgevind het, voorkom gewees het en sou ekonomiese skade beperk kon word. Swak munisipale infrastruktuur wat bygedra het tot die skade en die dringendheid van die herstel daarvan dra by tot verdere krisisse en kan uitloop op 'n verdere humanitêre rampe. Sou wetteloosheid en korrupsie nie daar gewees het nie, kon dit die belastingbetalers se sakke gered het. Die monster wat die oorsaak is van die ramp na die vloede is geïdentifiseer. Sy naam is die ANC. Dankie voorsitter.
Dankie. Honorable Thring.
Honorable House Chairperson, as we consider this report, the ACDP remembers the many lives that were lost in the floods, and this should spur everyone on to learn from the lessons of the devastating floods so that the areas of omission are never again repeated. The devastation brought by the floods wreaked havoc, washing away or damaging thousands of homes, including roads and key infrastructure. In KwaZulu-Natal, the three districts most impacted were eThekwini, Ugu, and Ilembe. In eThekwini alone, 31,220 jobs were affected, and the damage to the Toyota plant caused some 30,000 employees to become temporarily unemployed. Water and electricity outages added to the misery of millions of residents, where in eThekwini, in excess of 100 power stations were severely affected by the floods. Additionally, the cost to the business sector and the economy was estimated to be around 25 billion. One would have thought that after coming out from one of the most unnecessary and harshest lockdowns in the world, where over 3 million jobs were lost only to be faced with a natural flood disaster, our government's disaster relief programs would kick in speedily. That, however, would be wishful thinking, as this report clearly states that sustained follow-up by state departments in the aftermath of the flood disaster has not been forthcoming. Rather, it was church, other religious and non-governmental organizations like Churches Alliance for Social Transformation that stepped in to provide humanitarian support where government failed. The MR 559 or the Milky Way Road leading to the community in which I serve and to thousands of other communities in Kwandengezi, Mpola, Chelinyama, and Shongweni was washed away, together with the pipes directing a stream into the nearby river. A diversionary route of rocks and sand over the stream has been created. And obviously this is completely unsustainable, but it is one of the examples of failed promises, failed service delivery, and the missing 1 billion rand. Much of the damage caused to homes, businesses, water and sanitation infrastructure, roads and bridges could have been avoided or minimized had proper infrastructure maintenance and repair been done in the first instance. For goodness sake, let's not blame our deteriorating infrastructure on global warming. The ACDP welcomes the support and supports this frank and honest report. I thank you.
Thank you. UDM, ATM, Honorable Sheikh Imam. Honorable Sheikh Imam.
Thank you, House Chairperson. Thank you, House Chairperson. I'm back so I can put my video on. You know, Chairperson, had we known that we were spending a lot of taxpayers' money to send this committee to come back and insult and criticize each other, then maybe we would have, on second thoughts, not sent them. Because I think they had a purpose, and correctly so, and let me welcome this report. It's a true reflection of exactly what is happening on the ground. Thank you to Honorable Frodick and team for giving us an insight into some of the problems, of course, many of which we know for a long period of time. One of them being, of course, the lack of capacity at this local government level to be able to deal with, not just with disasters, but normal work. If you look at crumbling infrastructure and things that have given rise to the situation they find themselves, I think the flooding has only aggravated it. But had there not been a flooding, at some stage, they were still going to have a problem because of the poor infrastructure in any event. But I think what must come of this, Chairperson, is this, that there must be some consequences for these people, that despite allocating these resources for disaster management, they are not able to spend it timeously, and yet they have not solved the problem. And I must agree that, perhaps the avenue or environment is not conducive for some of them to actually loot. If you look at what is happening in eThekwini with the massive scandal that has just taken place now with the water tankers, I can tell you, Chairperson, that water tanker scam is a norm in KwaZulu-Natal particularly. And in most of the municipalities where they have a water crisis, that's the problem. They are bringing in these water tankers. It's another way of them actually making money out of it. So I think what is important to note here, that the report that we have gives us an indication of the serious situation we find ourselves at local government level. Secondly, what are we going to do to prepare these very same municipalities if there is going to be another disaster? Thirdly, and very importantly, what are we going to do to get them to up their game and provide capacity and consequent management for those that can't do the work? And of course, more importantly, I must agree with Honorable Frodick. Why must national parliament go to local government? What are they getting paid for? Why are they not doing the work? You need national government to now spend money and their time and go out there to go and conduct oversight to ensure that they spend the money timelessly and deal with the challenges that they face as a result of this flooding. This flooding for me is just another excuse for them because of their failures over a long period of time, Chairperson. So the National Freedom Party will support this report, but we're hopeful that there will be some consequence management for these people that are failing to provide the services that they are paid for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Honorable Jireko.
Thank you, Speaker, Deputy Ministers, Chief Whip, members. As the ANC, we have learned not to lose our heads in crisis, but to tell the truth and come up with a changeable solution to the problems that we are facing, which is something that the DA knows nothing about, because all that they know is to use unfortunate situation of our people to score cheap political points. It is necessary in this space that you are facing to want to grandstand. Such behavior of the DA is like the one that their great-grandfathers used on our grandmothers, to use the unfortunate situation to score political point, which is very, very heartless and lacks the spirit of Ubuntu. Honorable Groenewald, your approach towards this discussion is really, really disappointing. It's a perfect example of a desktop oversight. You were never there when we were going all around. You just came here and presented whatever that you present. Hence, you'll be speaking about the monsters because you have nothing to say. You were so important to come with us and dirty your white hair, your white feet in the crowd, in the sandy side, in the sandy crowd of Abu KZN, Eastern Cape and Northwest. Hence, you'll come and say whatever that you want to do because you were never there. You don't understand the situation. You just have to come and say something. Honorable Speaker, as the African National Congress, we are concerned about the pace of recovery in KZN, Eastern Cape, Northwest flood disaster impact. It is really disappointing that nearly 8 months after the disaster, we still have people living in shelters, which raises many questions as to how long will those people be staying in those shelters? How long will those people be transferred to temporary residential areas? When are they going to be transferred to the permanent residence? And how long is that process going to take? Because the temporary residential units is not supposed to be more than a year, but we are almost 8 months and the people are still staying in those shelters, which is an environment which is not conducive. And as we speak now, this situation that we are facing, it really lacks sense of agency. It really lacks conscience. It really lacks political will and administrative leadership in all the spheres that are affected in this matter. This has resulted to a delay to the response that we needed in this disaster. The level of trauma and displacement of families who continue to live in the shelters and temporary residential units necessitate immediate intervention by government. We are now facing festive season when most of the families are going to spend time with their families. Unfortunately for the disaster victims, it will not be the same with them because they have been deprived an opportunity to spend time with their families because of our slow pace in addressing this matter of the disaster. To avoid history from repeating itself, we must draw some lessons from this disaster. Proper coordination, effectiveness, and a reasonable timeframe for addressing our challenges should be our priority as government. However, despite the difficulties that I've just mentioned, there were some positive stories that we've also observed in some of municipalities and government departments after our first visit. We've also seen an improved process of allocating TRU, the restoration of damaged bridges by SANRAL in some of the municipalities such as Amazimtoti and others. We call on national, provincial, and municipal leadership and public servants to make an urgent intervention to ensure all funds are utilized to rebuild and reconstruct the destructions which has been caused by a disaster. As a public representatives, we expect the various spheres of government to respond to the commitment of the president, which enjoined all the organs of state to act together and also make sure that they deliver what they are supposed to do to our community because our responsibility is to serve our people. It's really disturbing that the president went to KZN and made some commitment. And on the other side, those who are supposed to implement, they have failed on duty. So someone is sleeping on duty and there's a need for consequence management. We must acknowledge and commend some of the critical intervention by government, although they were late. The lack of sufficient disaster management capacity resulted in the president deploying the South African Defence Force to assist with the rescue mission and rebuilding of bridges and infrastructure. Despite the shortfalls, the national government also were able to respond helpfully by drawing from all relevant departments and their entities. The honorable member from the DA also asked what happened to the money. It's really funny because all of us were part of the AG's meeting where the AG was explaining exactly the expenditures which we were used during this. So on the AG's report, she explained exactly what happened to the money. So unless if that DA member was there, then we don't know what happened. But
all the measures of communications were there. So everybody was able to hear what the AGs was doing. We're even given an opportunity to ask questions regarding this matter. So it's really funny, and it's so unfortunate that he will come here and try to grandstand and speaks about the elections. We are not speaking about elections, we are speaking about the livelihood of our people. So those ones who have funny characters, you will see them in situations like this, the heartless organizations that only cares about themselves, but nothing else. DA monster. The Department of Social Development has also provided social protection by working with civil societies and various partners from different provinces and businesses who ensures that affected families and residents have food. Although it was not enough, but we must also commend the level of solidarity displayed by South African and government at all. The spirit of Ubuntu displayed by nation should also be one of the issues that we learn from this disaster, because it really made an impact. It shows that if we can stop blaming one another and work together, we can achieve more. We have expressed a concern with the pace of recovery and reconstruction in restoring the people's lives to normality, as some continue to live in temporary accommodation, despite funds being allocated, while other victims still lack continuous support of food. Speaker Rilaya, in one of the shelters where we met a young boy who was about 18 years, and they were there in that unconducive environment. We then asked him, how do you survive? He then said, the fact that I'm able to wake up every morning, hopes keeps me alive. And that statement alone speaks to us as government to say, if we have government that the people have voted for and have trusted for their lives, and when they're in that situation that speaks about hope, it means somewhere, somehow we need to find a way of correcting whatever mistake that you have committed, so that we bring back the hope of our people to government, not any political parties like the DA will come and say the ANC or what. As all of us as in this place, we are government, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we provide services to our people. And this disaster did not only happen to the ANC-led municipality, but it also happened to some of the municipalities of the oppositions. And we also experienced challenges in those municipalities. But because in this committee, we worked as the one team, we're able to work together and come up with solutions. So it's very funny that others will come here and grandstand. It's really, really embarrassing. It does not represent our committee very well. The problem of the municipalities and provincial department needing to develop project plan and application as required by Treasury for allocation of funds has resulted in the delay of the project. And we really need to come up with a solution. We must find a way of releasing the funds immediately when we have disaster. Because when we're there, when we're dealing with the issue of disaster, it took some of the municipalities 2 to 3 months before they could apply for the funds of the disaster, because they were unable to master the red tapes and the system. Hence, there was a delay. So it is also important that the Department of Cocta and Treasury come up with another way that will be able to make the government to effectively deal with the disaster.
Thank you very much. AIC Cope Al-Jama, the Honorable Hussein.
Thank you, Honorable Chairperson. May I start by saying to Honorable Director that she shouldn't actually be blaming the DA for the ANC failures. When one reads these reports, this report and all the details in it, you will see very clearly how the Parliament and this report exposes the ANC for their own failures. So actually, Honorable Director, you don't need it's not the DA that you must blame for the ANC failures. You guys are doing a fine job all on your own, and this report actually proves that. If there's ever an opportunity, Chairperson, to test the responsiveness of any institution or government department, it comes at a time of a crisis. The floods of April 2022 was an ideal opportunity to test our different levels of government's ability to respond in a manner that brings hope for its people. Within days of the disaster, President Ramaphosa announced a 1 billion rand flood relief fund. But to this day, 7 months later, some departments have yet to spend that money to provide the relief that the president promised. When one reads this report, it exposes exactly how poorly all levels of our government have responded to the flood disaster. I must mention at the outset, and to the credit of both chairpersons of the committee, this ad hoc committee acted in common purpose across all political parties, which was very positive. Regardless of our political backgrounds, it is fair to say that all members of this committee were genuinely committed to ensuring that there was an effective response to the flood disaster, which impacted on thousands of families. What we found as a committee, that although in many areas there was some good progress being made in respect of repairs to damaged infrastructure, there was, however, a common lack of urgency, extraordinary delays, and poor response from almost all levels of our government, from local to national government departments. And to this day, since April this year, there are still hundreds of people, men, women, and children sleeping alongside each other in community halls here in KZN. Hundreds of other families have been relocated several times already with little or no respect for their dignity. And no amount of complaining is yielding any results, which is why it took the DA to lead a march recently to the Human Rights Commission to speak up for those flood victims, because our governments in KZN simply don't care, nor do they respond with the urgency that the situation requires. Public infrastructure in eThekwini, for example, remains in a serious state of disrepair, and the longer it takes, the more expensive it will become to repair. Every single day without fail in Durban, you will find sewer flowing onto the streets and rivers. Dozens of damaged sewer pump stations that were destroyed during the floods have yet to be repaired, and most of this is flowing into the beaches in Durban. If any of the honorable members here are planning a beach holiday in Durban this December, just remember our beaches are full of kak. The ANC government in eThekwini is fast asleep. The mayor is also nowhere to be found these days. He didn't even bother to turn up to brief the committee on eThekwini's response to the flood disaster when the committee first visited eThekwini. I do believe that this committee has done well to expose the weaknesses and poor response from provincial and municipal governments. The reality is that this report is actually a scathing report by this parliament against ANC-run governments and exposes their inability to operate efficiently and effectively at a time of crisis. Where we believe as the DA that the report is lacking is on its recommendations. Chairperson, while most recommendations make sense, the report fails to recommend strong and stern action against politicians and officials who have dragged their feet at a time when urgent action was required. Sadly, once again, like many reports that appear before this House, there is no accountability for poor performance. And unsurprisingly, all of these poor performers are ANC-run governments. So the one big takeaway from this very good oversight work that this committee has undertaken
Thank
is
you
simply
very
that
much. Your time has expired. Thank you, Honorable Hussein.
rely on ANC governments.
Honorable Hussein, your time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you.
The Honorable Manu. Oh, before you, Honorable Manu. Yes, Honorable Hope.
House Chair, I wanted to check whether that word which the member used is parliamentary or not. He used the word kak in the House.
Oh, I couldn't hear that, but I will revert to the Hansard and then I'll come back to the House. Thank you. Honorable Manu. Honorable De Villiers, is that correct?
Yes, Chairperson. I would just like to say that as Afrikaans speaker, that word was used technically.
No,
correct.
honorable member.
It's a
Honorable member.
swear word.
Honorable member, I've already ruled on that one. Please don't try. No, don't do that. Order, honorable members. Honorable Manu is on the podium. Honorable De Villiers, Honorable Man, as a belief, Khadebe. At Muni Warini, Exaldaran cake. Kanan Akbar Litmanu.
Thank you very much, House Chairperson, Chief Whip of the Majority Party, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, fellow South Africans. Firstly, we should send once more our condolences.
Please wait. ITC, there's a lot of echo. I don't know, it has been happening, but going down, happening, going down. Thank you. Proceed.
In particular, those who lost their lives and those who are still having missing persons. In particular, we remember the life of Sergeant Busisiwe Mjwara, who lost her life while conducting a search in the Msunduzi River. Sadly, she also lost a dog which was assisting her to recover people named Leah, and many others which we have not mentioned by name. Our hearts, our prayers go out to them. These are the people that we should be remembering as we present this report here today, which amongst many things has proven that if we work together, we can achieve more. And if we listen, unlike what Honorable Hussein didn't do, he didn't listen, you will understand that this devastation affected municipalities across political lines. But we never went there to look at who is running this municipality. We went to look at what our people were suffering from. And this is what this report presents. Climate change is not a distant reality for the earth and our country, but we are in the midst of it. Climate change poses a significant risk to the country's development because floods and other disasters can reverse our infrastructure development gains. Therefore, all spheres of government must develop and prioritize adaptation and mitigation strategies to learn and to lessen the negative impact of climate change on infrastructure development, especially as the rollout of infrastructure through the economic reconstruction and recovery plan happens. The flood disaster created an estimated loss of about 25 billion rand, and the post-recovery is estimated at about 17.8 billion. The flood negativity impacted on the logistical transport modes of road, rail, and sea. In terms of Transnet freight rail rolling stock, it was indicated that a total of 433 wagons and 100 electric diesel locomotives were damaged. Transnet is also assessing the damage to the rail network. I don't know where the ANC failure came in there, where a flood damages Toyota. I don't know where ANC failure comes in there. So that is why it is very disheartening. That is why it is very disheartening that you can hear people who are grandstanding here. The transport infrastructure in terms of rail and road and port infrastructure of KZN requires to be restored with urgency, as this is the transport infrastructure is the gateway to the major inlet. Progress, as all previous speakers have said, has been slow, but with increased funding for areas which experience flooding by government through the Division of Revenue Amendment Bill, implementation progress requires to be accelerated. Road development has been allocated an extra 1 billion rand. Implementation of infrastructure plans for the transport is critical for economic development and growth. We welcome, as the ANC, the establishment of a climate change unit to develop adaptation and mitigation plans for the port. This project also needs to be accelerated, and we cannot continue discussing plans infinity. Social infrastructure was also impacted upon, with homes and schools being destroyed, which has resulted in a disruption of teaching and learning. And I think the Honorable Hlengwa highlighted those particular areas. We note that the KwaZulu-Natal provincial government has commenced developing temporary residential units. But one thing that as the committee we noted is inconsistency. For instance, in the pricing of these TRUs. In one province, the price is different to the other one. And it's something that we highlight and we think there should be uniformity. The issue of spatial development or the usage thereof of land is something that government has to take very, very seriously. The government has thus far allocated 1 billion rand, as I said, as a national response. Treasury has, at the 12th of August 22 meeting that some colleagues mentioned, approved a total of 429.8 million in provincial and municipal disaster response. So there is no money that is missing. Every money, if you listen to Treasury, you listen to the live audits of the AGSA, you will know that there is no money missing. Well, I wouldn't be surprised because the colleague who was talking mostly about things never bothered to go to any other place other than eThekwini. So that's why his input could only have been focused on eThekwini. He was never in Port St. John's. He was never in the northern parts of KwaZulu-Natal. He was never in Northwest. And he comes and grandstands here as if he was in all those things. So he was never there. And all we know who we are talking about is he went into one place. I didn't even want to tie his party with him because I think other people in his party could have done better. It was the wrong deployment, Chief Whip of the DA. Next time
Let's
you
be
must
clear,
ask
it's
us to
Honorable
give you a
Wayne
better
Thring,
deployment.
and I was in the other provinces as well.
Honorable Thring, please, are you, what is, Honorable Thring? Okay, I think, proceed.
The government's weaknesses concerning maintenance in the lack of planning and budgeting as a percentage of the infrastructure expenditure didn't go unnoticed. The focus on developing new infrastructure will result in a reciprocal decline in the capacity of the services provided. This will happen due to non-functionality of the infrastructure. The report highlights that, and many colleagues have said that specifically. Electricity supply is also being normalized, although the beaches, as we've been told with that word that I don't know how to repeat it, but all these are being normalized and faults are being dealt with. Most of the roads have been reopened and rehabilitation where it is required has commenced. Bridges were also restored while some bridges were under construction. And a lot has been said about the response and public enterprise and the minister in that regard and the former premier there. Work on the 23 hospitals and 24 clinics which the floods had damaged is carrying on and needs to continue servicing the community's health needs. However, most of the health facilities in the province of KwaZulu-Natal are now functional, we believe. So the reconstruction of the Bayhead Canal has already been mentioned. So in conclusion, the ANC supports this report. And we thank once more, although you has already thanked the leadership of Honorable Frolic and Honorable Nyambi, and the working together of every person in that committee. It was such a wonderful, team to work in. And we think that a lot more can be achieved. So we need also to congratulate the emergency workers that went out there from different provinces, even those that came from the DA-led Western Cape, but they went there to save people. And we thank each and everyone who went out there with their purpose was to save lives. That was the primary purpose. And our going out there as an ad hoc committee was to see where are the lapses as a collective. Freedom Front Plus, shame on you. Shame on you. That's such a disaster. You should come and mislead people and say there's missing money. There is no missing money because you were never there. You were missing in action. Shame on you. Thank you, House Chairperson.
Thank you, Honorable Manu.
Well done.
Thank you. That concludes the debate and the report. And I now recognize the Chief Whip of the Majority Party.
Thank you very much, House Chair. House Chair, I move that this report be adopted with all its recommendations because it is going to take this country forward, having seen most of the political parties being united on what must be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Honorable members, the motion is that the reports be adopted. Are there any objections? Yes, the DA.
House Chair, please note the objection of the Democratic Alliance.
Thank you. Noted.
House Chair, I'll wait for EFF.
House Chair, committee mayikhuphe.
Angizwa ma. Obamzwile. Okay, Honorable Singh.
House Chair, we support the report and compliment the committee on great work done. And we know it will help the people of South Africa.
Thank you. Honorable members, with one objection, the report is thus agreed to. Thank you. Before I ask the secretary to read the last order, I just want to do this. Honorable members, on the 8th November 2022, during member statements, Honorable Peacock said the ACDP are openly homophobic and has endorsed outlandish ideas about COVID-19 vaccines. The Honorable Swart rose on a point of order and asked the chair to consider whether it is parliamentary for an honorable member to accuse a party which includes its members of being homophobic. At the time, I said I will look into the matter and revert back to the House with a considered ruling. Having studied the Hansard, I rule as follows. Honorable Peacock indeed did say that the ACDP are openly homophobic. It is clear from the record that Honorable Peacock was not referring to a specific member, but to a political party in general. Whilst the rules clearly and necessarily prohibit reflections on members, they do not forbid reflection on formations on group or groupings, such as government or a political party in general. We have always drawn a distinction between allegations against members of the House and the expression of opinion about the beliefs and policies of political parties. References made against a political party are made frequently in this House and have not been ruled unparliamentary. It has been consistently ruled in this House that reference to a political party are not unparliamentary, even when those references may be considered unparliamentary, if they had been directed at a specific members of this House. Honorable members, our Constitution affirms and celebrates us in our individuality, our commonality, and our diversity. Let us respect each other at all times and uphold these constitutional values. Let us reflect this in type of discourse we have in this House as a public representative. I want to thank you. Honorable members, I will ask the secretary
Honorable
to
House
read
Chair.
the last order. Yes, Honorable Thring.
I've had my hand raised, and I'm not sure if you've seen it.
Can see it now, Honorable Thring,
Okay.
yes.
No, thank you, Chair. Chair, I just on behalf of the ACDP want to thank you for your ruling, but also just clearly state the ACDP is not homophobic. We differ, but we are not homophobic. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Member. It was not necessary. That was just a ruling. Thank you very much. The secretary will read the last order of the day.
Consideration of budgetary review and recommendation report of Portfolio Committee on Employment and Labor.
Thank you very much. Honorable members, there has been a request for declaration, a reminder, 2 minutes. Let me start with the DA.
Honourable Chairperson, the budgetary review and recommendations report of the Portfolio Committee on Employment and Labour is a good example of fiddling while Rome burns. Like this Parliament, engulfed in flames thanks to a combination of negligence and indifference, the country faces another coming conflagration, the slow burning anger of over 11 million unemployed South Africans. Our committee doesn't seem too bothered by it. What other than laxity and apathy could account for this meaningless report, the product of the ANC's hallmark mediocrity? Joblessness will destroy our society, but the ANC couldn't be bothered to do anything about it. That is why the unemployment rate keeps on rising. In 1994, the official unemployment rate was 20%. Today, it sits, as we know, from the third quarterly labor survey
Honorable Moss, please. Continue, Dr. Kado.
Today, that rate sits at 32.9%. The Department of Employment and Labour has failed to tackle its expanded mandate of job creation. The department should be focusing its efforts on supporting labour-intensive sectors like light manufacturing and tourism to create new jobs and take on new workers. This is where the opportunity for growth and access to a global market of 7 billion consumers lies. Through labour market deregulation, the department should be making it easier for businesses to absorb large numbers of relatively unskilled workers into productive employment. And it should be championing the cause of small business owners who are choked by the extension of collective bargaining agreements and other onerous labour regulations. In the face of these challenges, the observations and recommendations in this report are feeble, and the DA cannot support them. Thank you.
Thank you. EFF. The EFF.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Chair, the budget review and recommendation report by the Portfolio Committee on Employment and Labour is yet another demonstration that we have turned such an important role of committee into malicious compliance. The department oversees two important entities responsible for managing billions of rands on behalf of workers, the Compensation Fund and the UIF. They both failed to submit financials to the Auditor General. The Compensation Fund is managed by one of the most incompetent and administrator whose arrogance and close proximity to the Director General is the only reason why he continues to earn a salary while his performance is a disgrace. The Compensation Fund has failed to implement endless turnaround strategies, but every time he comes to Parliament, it's like he was employed yesterday. He tells members of Parliament that the Compensation Fund is delivering, but turns around and tells service providers that they owe money that they don't have, that they don't have money. They continue to receive bad audits. Officials don't want to disclose their financial interests because there is no consequences. The department has failed to fill its critical positions, including inspectors. This is not new. We don't know why Productivity SA exists and why we continue to spend money on it. Mpumalanga and Limpopo branches of the department are as good as closed. To support this report is to endorse incompetence, corruption, and betrayal to our vulnerable workers, let alone millions of unemployed young people The EFF rejects these non-performance reports, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. IFP,
Thank you, Honorable House Chairperson. I'm standing here on behalf of my colleague, Honorable Nobo, who is not available today. In light of the latest unemployment statistics released by South African, by Stats SA, we are all acutely aware of how severe South Africa's unemployment crisis truly has become. The 44% of South Africa's working age population is unemployed. This is not only unsustainable, but should be a primary concern of the government and the Department of Employment and Labor and its entities. The median age of South is 27.6 years. This is an entire young population which should be active and working to grow our failing economy, but there is a lack of jobs and opportunities. As the IFP, we echo the youth's frustration. The government needs to do more to drive and create jobs. The report also echoes the same sentiment, recommending that the Department of Employment and Labor needs to do more to collaborate with other departments and public agencies to populate employment figures and encourage small business to create more employment, especially for youth and women. The committee also noted material conditions that exacerbated the level of unemployment, including COVID-19, which can no longer be used as an excuse for the failure of the department to promote and create job opportunities. This same PERSI program are failing in other departments, just as it is failing our people. It is concerning that an entity which is created to create jobs cannot fulfill its core mandate. The supported employment services inability to generate
2
work
minutes is
opportunities.
gone. Nkosi.
Thank you. IFP ixhasile nokho report.
Thank you. FF plus.
Thank you, House Chair. Chairperson, the expanded unemployment rate for the third quarter is 43.1%. This means that nearly half of the economically active population in this country is unemployed. Dit is 'n vratsgolfkrisis wat daagliks dreig om Suid-Afrika te verswelg. Met die privaat sektor as enigste skans tussen ons en die vloedwater. Die Departement van Arbeid en Werkskepping, wat veronderstel is om die werknemers en werkgewers van hierdie land te beskerm, bemagtig en bevorder, skiet ongelukkig ver tekort en as sodanige se lot slegs aan hierdie departement oorgelaat was, het ons lankal verdrink. Want dieselfde foute word herhaaldelik gemaak. Chairperson, the BRR report of the Department of Labor and its entities, insufficient as it is, highlights many persisting problems in this department, one of which is a lack of consequence management. The Auditor General also notes this in their report, stating that material errors identified within the department itself, NEDLAC, and supported employment services are due to inadequate audit action plans that fail to address the root causes and a culture of consequence management that is still not implemented effectively. Eweneens is dieselfde probleme wat jaar na jaar voorkom en telke male deur die komitee of laat ek liewer sê die oppositie uitgewys word steeds ewig teenwoordig. Dit wil voorkom of die audit aksieplan om die ongevalle kommissarisfonds om te keer of te stadig of glad nie werk nie. Steeds is hierdie fonds nie gereed om geaudit te word nie. Met die openbare beleggingskorporasie wat in ongelyste entiteite belê het en hierdie entiteite se voete sleep met die voorsiening van finansiële inligting wat as verskoning voorgehou word. Weereens die skreiende gebrek aan verantwoordbaarheid, want nie net moet dit 'n institusionele kultuur wees nie, maar moet verantwoordbaarheid ook van filiale vereis word. Dieselfde waarnemings, dieselfde voorstelle, gesaniteer deur die ANC meerderheid op die komitee, maar steeds gebrekkige vordering. Die VF+ ondersteun nie hierdie verslag nie. Dankie, voorsitter.
Baie dankie, ACDP.
Thank you, House Chair. No declaration from our side. Thank you.
Thank you. UDM, ATM, good. NFP.
Yes, thank you, House Chairperson. Once again, this department is being reckless when it comes to irregular expenditure. Well, it seems to be the norm, with almost 34% percent of our people unemployed in this country, and of course the youth going to about 70%. What is really this department doing to protect the employees, particularly of South Africans and our own people? I have raised, Chairperson, with the minister and this department on numerous occasions of the violation of our workers' rights in South Africa, where the Chinese are paying our workers 60 Rand a day. And this is consistent through the length and breadth of South Africa. This department, who even gave a commitment that they will meet, have done very little or nothing about it. And the question that arises is why? Let's look at the issue of UIF and particularly maternity benefits. Did you know, Chairperson, before this mother who had gone already through whatever she did in giving birth to this baby gets that money, the child is already walking. That's how bad it is as far as the department is concerned. The Auditor General has already raised questions about fruitless and wasteful expenditure. This department is doing nothing in this country to protect the rights of the workers. And in any event, they talk about a high unemployment rate, but what is it doing when businesses, Chinese businesses, who are employing locals and foreigners in this country with no benefits whatsoever? How is it then that they are protecting ordinary South Africans to ensure that they are employed? What is the purpose, Chairperson, of having a minimum wage of 4,000 and people are getting paid 60 Rand a day? But this department will do nothing about it. So I think this department should shut down. They are wasting our time and wasting taxpayers' money. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. AIC, Hope, PAC, Al-Jama, the ANC. Ay, Bawu Pusopu. Oh, Dr. Pusopu, Basopu. Ay. Ay, awuqali kwanamhlanje please nangabe uyangizwa hayi usihlupe kakhulu siyadlula ku. Qhubeka ba.
Thanks, Chairperson in the House. Chairperson, the states that are normally bandied around, especially of 1994, are opportunistically used, and we know that a lot of analysts are not in agreement as the TBVC states were not yet included in such statistics. So the DA assertion of those statistics
Alternatively,
are wrong informed.
we can call him.
We are delighted with the continuous improvement that the Department of Employment and Labor and its entities demonstrate in the management of their finances. The improvements that I'm referring to are the ones that have been noted by the AG, having been amplified by the CCMA that has obtained unqualified audit opinions. So the department and its entities are working around the clock to achieve unqualified audit opinions, and the CCMA's accomplishments shows us that this can be achieved. Honorable members, it should be noted that even before COVID-19 pandemic, our country's economy was on a sort of a recession, amongst others due to existing structural constraints. COVID-19 exacerbated the economic conditions and which were already dire. The department helped in as far as making sure that a lot of our workers are cushioned from this devastating blow, and many businesses were saved. They are busy rebuilding and picking up the pieces, and everything is going in that direction. I conclude by saying we must not only comply, but we must be seen as agencies from the department, and importantly so to contribute immensely in reconstruction and development. And we see the department is moving in that direction with regards to a lot of the opinions that have come through. And for that matter, the ANC is supporting this report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Honorable members, are there any objections to the report being adopted? Honorable
House Chair, the Democratic Alliance, iyayixhasa le report.
Thank you.
Chairperson, please note the objection of the FF plus.
Noted,
Please note the objection of the ACDP.
noted,
Please note the objection of the EFF.
noted. With those objections, the report is thus agreed to. Honorable members, order, honorable members. Honorable members, I'm going to request you to stand. And wait for the maize to leave the chamber. The sergeant at arms. That is how we should be doing it. Thank you very much. The house is now adjourned. Thank you.
We are also.